Welcome to Mark Noir Detectives. Like, subscribe, and stay with the mystery. Tell me, which part of the world are you watching from?
Chapter 1. The date. No one mentioned on the morning of October 17th. I was halfway through the sports section, and Wolfe was halfway through a plate of corn cakes with sausage when the Harland family reminded me that memory can be more suspicious than murder. The reminder came from a photograph on page 3 of the Gazette. It showed 4 members of the Harland clan arriving at a charity banquet the night before, dressed as if the fate of civilization depended upon polished shoes and expensive fabric. There was Conrad Harland, broad and silver-haired, with one hand raised toward the cameras. Beside him stood his younger sister, Ellen, wearing pearls and the expression of a woman who expected the world to apologize for being untidy. Behind them were Conrad's son, Miles, and Ellen's daughter, Ruth. The caption identified them, named the charity, and mentioned that the banquet had raised nearly $200,000. It also gave the date. October 16th. I lowered the paper and looked across the breakfast table. Wolfe had completed 1 corn cake and was preparing the next with the care of a jeweler setting a stone. He applied a measured amount of butter, added maple syrup, and regarded the result with approval. Breakfast was not a meal to him. It was a treaty between appetite and civilization. "Do you remember the Harlands?" I asked. His eyes moved toward me without turning his head. "I remember many people I would prefer to forget. The Harlands came here every October 16th. They came here on several October 16ths. 20 of them. Possibly. Not possibly. Exactly. 20. The first year was before I joined you, but Fritz has the records. Old Matthew Harland and his wife, Beatrice, had their wedding dinner here. After Matthew died, the children kept it going. After Beatrice died, they still kept it going. Every year, same date, same dining room, same silver bowl of white roses, same argument over the wine, and the same speech from Conrad about family loyalty." Wolfe cut into the corn cake. "You have demonstrated that repetition encourages resentment. You are avoiding the point. I am eating breakfast. The point is that yesterday was October 16th, and they did not come. Then the chairs were spared. They did not telephone. They did not send a note. They did not ask Fritz to prepare the usual dinner. They did not even mention the anniversary at that banquet." Wolfe chewed, swallowed, and placed his fork on the plate. "Archie, an anniversary is not a debt. It need not be collected. This one was." He gave me a look. It was not a warning look exactly. Wolfe's warnings came in several grades, and this one merely suggested that I was approaching the border between conversation and nuisance. I pushed the newspaper across the table and tapped the photograph. "Look at their faces." "I have." Conrad looks pleased. Ellen looks annoyed. Miles looks bored. Ruth looks as if she has heard a noise nobody else noticed. That is an imaginative interpretation of a poor photograph. It is a professional interpretation. Your profession is detecting facts, not inventing expressions. Fine. Here is a fact. For 20 years, the Harlands observed the anniversary. This year, every one of them forgot it. Wolfe resumed eating. Families abandon customs. Not this one. People forget dates. 4 people forgot the same date? 5, if you include Amos Harland. That stopped me. I had been counting only the people in the photograph. Amos was the youngest of the Harland siblings, a nervous little man who handled the family accounts and apologized when other people stepped on his shoes. "You remember Amos?" I said. "I remember that he suffers from indecision and damp hands. He was not at the banquet." "Apparently not. You noticed that? I can count, Archie." I reached for the newspaper again. The caption listed Conrad, Ellen, Miles, and Ruth. Amos was not mentioned. Neither was Lila Harland, Conrad's second wife, though she usually attended public events at his side. Before I could develop a theory involving poison, blackmail, or collective madness, Fritz entered from the kitchen carrying a fresh pot of coffee. He set it down, glanced at the newspaper, and frowned. Fritz Brenner does not frown casually. He regards disorder in the kitchen as a moral offense and badly prepared food as evidence of social collapse. The Harland anniversary dinner had always been one of his grand campaigns. "You have seen it," I said. "Yes." He looked at Wolfe. "I had expected a message from Mr. Conrad Harland last week. Regarding the dinner?" I asked. Fritz nodded. It was always confirmed 10 days before. Mrs. Beatrice Harland arranged it herself while she lived. After her death, Mr. Conrad called. Once his secretary called, but Mr. Conrad telephoned again to make certain the details were correct. What? Details? The same each year. Oyster stew, roast duck with chestnut dressing, glazed onions, a salad of watercress and apples, walnut cake with warm cream. Wolfe's brows rose a fraction at the mention of the cake. Fritz continued. The wines changed according to Mr. Wolfe's judgment. Everything else remained fixed. "Did you prepare anything this year?" I asked. "I ordered the ducks." Wolfe turned his head. "You ordered them without confirmation." Fritz met his eyes. That took courage, but Fritz had earned the privilege. The dinner had occurred every year for 2 decades. The butcher required notice. What became of the ducks? We ate one on Sunday. Wolfe considered this and decided not to pursue the charge. I said, "Did anyone from the Harland family call at all?" Fritz hesitated. It was only a second, but when you work in a house where Wolfe can spend 10 minutes deciding whether a word is acceptable, 1 second can carry luggage. "Someone called on October 8th, Fritz said. "Who?" "A woman. She asked whether the anniversary dinner had been confirmed." "What did you tell her?" "That it had not." "Did she give her name?" "She said it was unnecessary." Wolfe's coffee cup had paused halfway to his mouth. "What were her exact words?" he asked. Fritz thought. She said, "Then nothing has been arranged." I told her that nothing had been confirmed. She asked whether Mr. Wolfe had received a letter from the Harland family. I said I did not know. Then she ended the call. I looked at Wolfe. "You did not mention that," I told Fritz. There seemed nothing to mention. Many people ask foolish questions. "Did you recognize the voice?" I thought I had heard it before, but I could not place it. Young or old? Neither. Perhaps 40. The voice was controlled. Educated? Yes. Nervous? No. Careful. Wolfe lowered his cup. "Archie, bring me the correspondence file for the Harlands." That was progress. It was not yet an investigation, but it was the first twitch of the machinery. I went to the office. The brownstone on West 35th Street was quiet at that hour, with the city rumbling beyond the windows like a large animal turning in sleep. Upstairs, Theodore Horstman would already be among the orchids, measuring heat and moisture under Wolfe's supervision. At 9 sharp, Wolfe would climb the stairs to spend 2 hours with them. Murder, disaster, and the collapse of government were expected to respect that schedule. The Harland file was in the second cabinet. It was thicker than the importance of the family deserved, partly because Conrad wrote long letters, and partly because Wolfe never discarded anything that might later expose a lie. I carried it to the dining room. Wolfe wiped his fingers, opened the folder, and examined the contents. There were old notes about the dinners, lists of guests, wine selections, and several letters from Beatrice Harland. Her handwriting was upright and severe. Even the capital letters seemed to disapprove. At the back of the file was a sealed envelope. Leaned over, it was addressed to Nero Wolfe in a hand I did not recognize. There was no stamp. Someone had delivered it personally. "When did that arrive?" I asked. Wolfe turned it over. Written across the flap were 6 words, "To be opened on October 17th. I looked at Fritz. He looked at me. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "I have not seen this," he said. "That makes 3 of us." He examined the envelope again. "Who placed it in the file?" I said. "You are asking the man who keeps the files." Then answer. "I did not." Fritz shook his head. "Nor did I." The envelope had been filed between two letters dated the previous spring. Whoever had put it there knew our system well enough to choose the correct folder, but not well enough to understand that I handled nearly every piece of paper entering the house, or understood it perfectly and had found a way around me. Wolfe held the envelope up to the light. It was made of heavy cream paper. There was something inside besides a letter, something small and flat. The clock on the wall showed 8:43. Wolfe glanced at it, then at the envelope. "Open it," I said. "The instruction specifies today, not the hour, so we are safe." He ignored me and used the silver knife beside his plate. He cut the flap neatly, removed a single sheet of paper, and unfolded it. A small photograph slipped out and landed beside his coffee cup. It showed 5 people standing behind a long dining table in Wolfe's own dining room. Matthew and Beatrice. Harland stood in the center. Conrad, Ellen, and Amos were arranged behind them. The photograph had been taken at the first anniversary dinner held in the brownstone 20 years earlier. One face had been circled in black ink: Amos Harland Wolfe. Read the letter. His expression did not change, which meant the contents were either trivial or extremely interesting. I waited. He handed it to me. The message had been typed on an old machine with a damaged letter: R. Mr. Wolfe, the Harland anniversary will not be celebrated this year. By the time you read this, the family will have forgotten why it ever mattered. They will also have forgotten one person who was present at the first dinner. Ask Amos Harland what happened after midnight. Do not trust the family record. It has been corrected. There was no signature. I read it twice. Fritz moved closer. What does it mean? It means, I said, that someone has gone to a lot of trouble to make a family forget a dinner. Wolfe's gaze rested on the photograph. People do not forget by agreement, he said. They pretend. The telephone rang in the office. I went to answer it. A woman's voice asked for Wolfe. She sounded composed, educated, and careful. This is Archie Goodwin. Who is calling? A pause. Ruth Harland. I picked up a pencil. What can we do for you, Miss Harland? I need to speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately. He is at breakfast. Then interrupt him. That put her ahead of most callers, who wasted time trying to be polite. What is it about? My Uncle Amos disappeared last night. I looked through the doorway. Wolfe was still studying the old photograph. When was he last seen? At 7:30. He left his apartment and told the doorman he was coming to West 35th Street. To see Wolfe? He did not say. Did he arrive here? Not. Through the front door. Her breath caught, and when she spoke again, the careful control had cracked. Mr. Goodwin, there is something else. This morning, I asked my father why the family had not held the anniversary dinner. He stared at me as if I had invented it. Maybe he did not want to discuss it. He said there had never been an anniversary dinner. I stopped writing. 20 years of dinners, Ruth continued, and he says none of them happened. My Aunt Ellen says the same. Miles laughed at me. Even the household records have been changed. Every entry connected with October 16th is gone. Do you remember the dinners? Yes, at least I thought I did. What does that mean? It means I found a photograph in my room this morning. I am standing in Mr. Wolfe's dining room at last year's dinner. Her voice dropped. But I cannot remember being there. Told her to come at 11. When I returned to the dining room, Wolfe had placed the circled photograph beside the unsigned letter. He was looking annoyed, which was encouraging. Wolfe resents any assault on reason as another man might resent. A hand in his pocket. Ruth Harland is coming at 11, I said. Amos disappeared last night. He told his doorman he was coming to this street. The family denies the dinners ever happened, and Ruth has a photograph proving she attended one she cannot remember. Wolfe pushed his chair back. Pfui. That is my reaction too. He rose. Call Saul Panzer. Have him determine where Amos Harland went after leaving his apartment. Then telephone Inspector Kramer and ask whether any unidentified bodies were found during the night. You are taking the case? I am going to the plant rooms. That was not my question. He turned toward the hall. Someone entered this house, tampered with my files, and used my dining room as the stage for a lie. That is intolerable. He started for the elevator, then stopped. Archie. Yes? Find out who took that. Photograph. I picked it up. In the lower right corner, nearly hidden by the white tablecloth, was the faint impression of a photographer's mark, H. Vale. Do you recognize it? Wolfe asked. I will. He entered the elevator. The gate closed, and he began his ascent toward the orchids, where 10,000 blossoms waited for attention, and not one of them had ever lied about an anniversary. I stood in the hall, holding the photograph. 5 Harlands had attended the first dinner. 1 had disappeared. 3 denied the dinners had existed. 1 remembered them only through pictures. Someone had rewritten the family records, entered Wolfe's house, and planted a message timed for the morning after the anniversary vanished. It was not yet a murder, but it had excellent manners and had arrived by appointment. Chapter 2. Fritz remembers the menu at 9:12, while Wolfe was upstairs among the orchids and I was downstairs trying to locate a photographer named H. Vale. Fritz came into the office carrying a ledger, 3 invoices, and the expression of a man prepared to defend a source with his life. He placed the papers on my desk. There was no cancellation, he said. I believed you the first time. You believed that I expected the dinner. That is not the same thing. He opened the ledger to a page marked October. Fritz's handwriting was neat enough to make a bank clerk feel untidy. Listed beneath the date were the ingredients for the Harland dinner, including the oyster stew, the chestnut dressing, the glazed onions, and the walnut cake he had described at breakfast. Below them, in darker ink, were 3 additional entries: 2 roast ducks from Kessler's, 3 pounds of wild mushrooms, 1 almond cake decorated with silver leaves. I pointed to the last 3 items. You did not mention those. They were requested later. Bukoy. Conrad? No? Then by whom? Fritz drew one of the invoices toward me. A woman telephoned on October 6th. She said the family wanted to change part of the menu this year. She ordered roast duck without chestnut dressing, wild mushrooms cooked with shallots, and an almond cake instead of the walnut cake. That made the careful woman who had called on October 8th more interesting. Did she give her name? She, said Margaret Harland. I had the Harland file open on my desk. I turned to the family notes and ran a finger down the page. Matthew Harland, deceased. Beatrice Harland, deceased. Conrad Harland, eldest son. Ellen Harland, Vale, daughter. Amos Harland, younger son. Conrad's son, Miles. Ellen's daughter, Ruth. There was no Margaret. Which Margaret Harland? I assumed Mr. Conrad's wife. His wife's name is Lila. Fritz frowned at the ledger as if it had personally misled him. Perhaps Amos's wife. Amos never married. Then I do not know. What did Margaret sound like? Older than the woman who called on October 8th. Her voice was lower. She spoke slowly. Did you recognize it? Fritz shook his head. I believed I had heard the second woman before, not the first. I leaned back. So on October 6th, a woman calling herself Margaret Harland altered the traditional menu. On October 8th, another woman called to ask whether the dinner had been confirmed. Conrad never called. Then yesterday the family skipped the dinner, Amos disappeared, and somebody planted a letter in our files. Fritz's mouth tightened. The almond cake was delivered yesterday morning. Where is it? In the pantry. Untouched? Yes. Let me see it. Fritz gave me the kind of look a surgeon might give a stranger, asking to inspect an organ. But he led the way. The kitchen was his kingdom, and the pantry was one of its guarded provinces. The cake sat beneath a glass cover on a marble shelf. It was round, pale, and finished with a smooth layer of white icing. Silver leaves formed a ring around its edge. In the center, written in fine dark chocolate, were 4 words: for the one forgotten, I bent closer. That was not requested. Fritz said, Did you see the inscription when it arrived? Yes. And you did not tell us. I intended to show Mr. Wolfe after breakfast. Then there was the letter and the telephone call. Who delivered it? A boy from Bell's pastry shop. Did he bring a receipt? Fritz handed it to me. The order had been paid in cash. The customer's name was written as M. Harland. I took the receipt and returned to the office. By then I had spoken to Saul Panzer, who had agreed to trace Amos's movements, and to Sergeant Purley, Stebbins at Homicide, who had enjoyed telling me that Inspector Kramer did not provide unidentified bodies to private detectives as a morning courtesy. There had been no body matching Amos Harland's description, which was something, though not enough. At 11 minutes past 11, the doorbell rang. I expected Ruth. Instead, a woman of about 50 stood on the stoop. She wore a dark green coat, a small black hat, and gloves the color of ashes. She was tall without being imposing and pale without looking weak. Her eyes were grey and direct. "Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Your name?" "Margaret Harland." I did not move aside. "You are expected?" "I doubt it. That makes two of us." Her eyes moved past me into the hall. "I must speak with Mr. Wolfe. He is with his orchids until 11. It is now 11:12. Then he is probably telling one of them why the clock is wrong." She did not smile. "Tell him Margaret Harland is here." I let her in, took her coat and hat, and showed her to the office. She sat in the red leather chair, crossed her ankles, and placed her gloves in her lap. She did not look around. Most first-time visitors looked at the books, the globe, the oversized chair behind Wolfe's desk and the safe. Margaret Harland kept her eyes on me. "You ordered a cake," I said. Her fingers moved once against the gloves. "What cake?" "Almond, white icing, silver leaves, a cheerful message in the middle." "I ordered nothing. You also changed the dinner menu." "There was no dinner. Fritz says otherwise. Then Fritz is mistaken." That was poor strategy in Wolfe's house. Calling Fritz mistaken about food was like calling the sun unreliable about daylight. The elevator groaned. A moment later, Wolfe entered, crossed to his desk, and settled himself into his chair. He looked at Margaret, then at me. "You admitted a stranger." She gave a familiar name. Margaret turned to him. "I came to ask why your cook prepared a dinner for an event that never existed." Wolfe arranged himself, leaning back with his fingertips touching at the center of his vast chest. "You are Margaret Harland?" "Yes." "There is no Margaret Harland in the family records. Then the records are incomplete." "What is your relation to Conrad Harland?" "I am his sister." I took the family notes from the desk and checked them again. Not because I expected a new name to appear, but because paper sometimes enjoys making a man look foolish. Wolfe said, "Matthew and Beatrice Harland had 3 children." "They had 4. Conrad, Ellen, Amos, and you?" "Yes." "Why are you absent from every account of the family?" "Because I left." Families survive departures. Records usually do too. I was removed from them. "By whom?" "My mother." She said it without drama. That made it carry farther. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "When?" 20 years ago. The first anniversary dinner in the brownstone had taken place 20 years ago. I went to the cabinet, found the old photograph, and placed it on Wolfe's desk. Matthew and Beatrice stood behind the dining table with Conrad, Ellen, and Amos. There was no 4th child. I said, "Where were you when this was taken?" Margaret looked at the picture. Her face remained composed, but her right thumb pressed hard against the glove in her lap. "In this house. Not in the photograph." I had already left the room. Wolfe picked up the photograph. At what time? Near midnight. The dinner would have ended hours earlier. It did not. "What happened?" She looked at him, then at me, and made a decision. "You must ask Amos." "That instruction has already been given to us," Wolfe said. For the first time, Margaret's control failed. Her head turned sharply. "By whom?" Wolfe ignored the question. "Amos disappeared last night." Her face went still. "Who told you?" "Ruth Harland. Ruth remembers the dinners. She remembers that they occurred. She does not remember attending the most recent one." Margaret stood. "I should not have come." I moved between her and the door. "You came to ask about a dinner you say never existed." That deserves a few more minutes. Stand aside. Not until Mr. Wolfe is finished. Wolfe said, "Sit down." She looked at him. It was not loud. Wolfe rarely needed volume. His voice had the weight of a closed door. Margaret sat. Wolfe studied her. "You claim the anniversary dinners never existed, yet you knew that Fritz had prepared one." "I heard about it." "From whom?" "Conrad." "When?" "This morning." "Conrad denies that any such dinner was ever held." "He told me your cook had ordered food." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Wolfe's lips pushed forward and then relaxed. "You telephoned Fritz on October 6th. I did not. You identified yourself as Margaret Harland and changed the menu to roast duck, wild mushrooms, and almond cake." Her eyes moved toward the door and back. "I made no call. Those foods have significance. It was not a question, but it struck." Margaret looked down at her gloves. Wolfe continued. "The original menu included oyster stew, chestnut dressing, glazed onions, watercress with apples, and walnut cake. The changed menu was not a variation. It was a replacement. Someone wished to reproduce a different meal." She said nothing. The bow almond cake bears the inscription, "For the one forgotten." You are the forgotten Harland. Therefore either you ordered it or someone ordered it to summon you. I had not seen that cake. But you knew Fritz had prepared the dinner. I told you how. Unsatisfactorily, she lifted her chin. "You cannot keep me here." Wolfe closed his eyes for 2 seconds. "Archie, bring the cake." I went to the pantry and returned with it on a silver tray, followed by Fritz, who would not allow an almond cake into the office without supervision. I placed it on Wolfe's desk. Margaret stared at the inscription. Her color changed. Not much, but enough. "You recognize the words," I said. She did not answer. Wolfe said, "Fritz, describe the woman who altered the menu." "I never saw her." Her voice, low, deliberate. She sounded older than 40. Margaret's gaze remained fixed on the cake. Fritz studied her. Then he inhaled sharply. "I remember now." She looked at him. Fritz pointed, which was something I had rarely seen him do. It was not her voice, but I have heard those words before. "What words?" I asked. "For the one forgotten." Wolfe opened his eyes fully. "When?" Fritz looked from Margaret to the old photograph. "At the first Harland dinner. Mrs. Beatrice Harland said them." The room became quiet. Fritz continued slowly, drawing the memory out of a place where it had been buried under 20 years of menus. It was late. Mr. Matthew Harland had asked for another bottle of wine. The family were arguing in the dining room. I entered with the almond cake. It was not the anniversary cake. A second cake had been delivered after dinner. "Decorated with silver leaves?" Wolfe asked. "Yes." Margaret's hand tightened around her gloves. Fritz looked at her. "You were there," she whispered. "You remember me?" I remember a young woman standing near the window. Mrs. Harland pointed to the cake and said, "That is for the one forgotten." Then Mr. Amos knocked the cake from the table. I felt a tingle run up my back. Wolfe asked, "What happened after that?" Fritz shook his head. "I do not know. You were present. I remember entering the room. I remember the cake falling. Then I remember cleaning the dining room. The next morning. What of the hours between?" Fritz's face showed genuine alarm. "I cannot recall them." Margaret rose again, but this time she did not move toward the door. "That is why I came," she said. Wolfe regarded her. "Explain." She looked at Fritz, then at the photograph, and finally at the words on the cake. "Because I remember the same thing. I remember the argument. I remember my mother saying those words. I remember Amos striking the cake." Her voice thinned. "After that, there is nothing until morning." I said, "You lost the same hours." "Yes." 20 years ago?" "Yes." Wolfe tapped one finger against the arm of his chair. 6 intelligent people cannot misplace the same memory by accident, I said. He gave me a brief glance. That observation was more useful the first time. The doorbell rang. I went to answer it. Ruth Harland stood outside, breathing hard, her hair damp from the mist that had begun to fall over 35th Street. She clutched a small leather book against her chest. I found this in Amos's apartment, she said. The police have not searched it yet. What is it? My grandmother's diary. I brought her into the office. She stopped when she saw Margaret. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Ruth's lips parted. I know you. Margaret's face had gone white. No, you do not. I have seen you in a photograph. There is no photograph of me. Ruth held up the diary. There is one inside this. Wolfe extended a hand. Ruth crossed the room and gave it to him. He opened the cover. A photograph had been tucked between the first pages. It showed the dining room on the night of the first anniversary dinner. The tablecloth was stained. The almond cake lay smashed on the floor, its silver leaves scattered like coins. Matthew. Harland was gripping Conrad by the arm. Ellen stood against the wall. Amos was bent over someone who lay partly hidden beneath the table. Margaret stood near the doorway. On the back, in Beatrice Harland's handwriting, were 2 lines. October 16th. The night we agreed to forget. Wolfe placed the photograph beside the cake. Then he looked at Margaret. Madam, he said, you were not removed from the family because you left. She said nothing. You were removed because someone believed you had died. Ruth gasped. Margaret closed her eyes. Wolfe leaned back. And since you are plainly alive, the person beneath that table was someone else. Chapter 3. The empty place. At the table, Margaret Harland looked at the photograph on Wolfe's desk for nearly a minute before deciding it was a lie. That picture has been altered, she said. I leaned against the corner of my desk. That is becoming a family habit. The room may be yours, Mr. Wolfe, but the people have been placed in it. Fritz made a sound in his throat. To accuse a photograph of lying about his dining room was bad enough. To suggest that he had confused one smashed almond cake with another was asking for trouble. Wolfe remained motionless behind his desk, the cumwa. Old photograph lay beside the newly delivered cake, with Beatrice Harland's diary between them. Ruth occupied the yellow chair. Margaret sat in the red one. Fritz stood near the bookshelves, his arms folded. The photograph is genuine, Wolfe said. Its age, paper, and chemical fading are consistent with the date written on the reverse. You examined it for 30 seconds. That was sufficient to reject a clumsy fabrication. You cannot prove where it was taken. I can, I said. The panel behind your mother has a scratch shaped like a fishhook. It was made when I moved a cabinet 7 years ago. Margaret turned to me. This photograph is 20 years old. The scratch was there before I enlarged it. Fritz says a meat trolley struck the wall in 1938. Fritz nodded. A careless delivery man. Margaret looked again at the picture. The certainty in her face did not disappear, but it lost some of its polish. My parents never celebrated their anniversary in this house, she said. They never celebrated it anywhere outside the family estate. I straightened. You were here last year. That is absurd. I opened the door for you. You have confused me with someone else. You wore a grey dress, carried a silver bag, and objected to sitting beside Conrad because he smoked before dinner. I have not spoken to Conrad in 20 years. You spoke to him for 11 minutes in this office. She stared at me. I continued. You came at 7:20. Ruth arrived 5 minutes later. Ellen complained about the rain. Amos brought a bottle of wine Wolfe had not approved, and Wolfe refused to serve it. At 9:30, you asked Fritz for coffee and told him the almond biscuits were better than the ones at the Harland estate. Fritz's head turned toward her. Margaret's face had gone pale again, though not with fear this time. It looked more like anger trapped behind a locked door. I was not here. You were. You are mistaken. I make mistakes, but not about a woman who told me my tie looked like a railway accident. Ruth glanced at my tie. It was brown, with narrow gold stripes, and had never been near a railway. Margaret pressed both hands against the arms of the chair. "My father's birthday dinner was held here last year," she said slowly. "I remember that." There was silence. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "What date was your father born?" he asked. "October 16th. Ruth turned sharply. "Grandfather was born in May." Margaret looked at her. "May 23rd, Ruth continued. "There is a bronze plaque in the library at the estate. It gives his birth and death dates." "You are wrong. I have seen it all my life." Margaret's breathing had become shallow. Wolfe watched her, with the concentration he usually reserved for an unusual orchid or a badly constructed sentence. "You remember attending a dinner in this house last year," he said. "I remember my father's birthday." "Your father had been dead for 12 years. It was a memorial dinner." "Who attended?" She answered without hesitation. "Conrad, Ellen, Amos, Ruth, Miles, Lila, and I." "The same persons who attended the anniversary dinner," I said. She ignored me. Wolfe asked, "What was served?" "Oyster stew, duck with chestnut dressing, glazed onions, watercress and apple salad, walnut cake." Fritz unfolded his arms. "The anniversary menu," he said. Margaret looked at him as if he had betrayed her. Wolfe continued. "What music was played?" She closed her eyes briefly. "A recording of Schubert, a string quartet." "Which one?" "I do not know." "The quartet in D minor," Fritz said. "Mrs. Beatrice Harland requested it every year." Margaret opened her eyes. Wolfe said, "Describe the table." "White linen, tall candles, a silver bowl of white roses in the center." "And the place cards?" "There were 8. Name the 8." She did. "Conrad, Ellen, Amos, Ruth, Miles, Lila, herself, and Wolfe." I shook my head. "Wolfe never ate with the Harlands. He joined them for coffee after dinner." Margaret frowned. "Then there were 7. "There were 8, Fritz said quietly. She looked at him. Fritz stepped nearer the desk. "I set 8 places every year." "For whom?" He hesitated. That hesitation interested Wolfe more than the answer would have. "Proceed," Wolfe said. Fritz looked troubled. "I do not remember." "You arranged the cards?" "Yes." "You served the meal?" "Yes." "You can name." 7 guests." "Yes." "Yet you cannot name the 8th." Fritz's face tightened. "There was always an empty chair." I stared at him. "What empty chair?" "At the far end of the table, opposite Mr. Conrad." "You never mentioned it." "I had forgotten. That word is doing too much work around here." Ruth rose and moved toward the photograph. "There was an empty place last year." "You remember it?" I asked. "I remember noticing the chair." I asked Uncle Amos who it was for. "What did he say?" Her forehead creased. "I cannot recall." Margaret spoke without looking at her. "He said it was for the dead." Ruth's head turned. Wolfe said, "You remember his answer?" "Yes." "What exactly did he say?" Margaret's eyes went toward the dining room doorway, though the room itself was beyond the hall. He said, "We leave one place for the person who cannot return." Fritz inhaled. "That was said at the first dinner." "By Amos?" Wolfe asked. "No, by Mrs. Beatrice." Margaret shook her head. "My mother was not at last year's dinner." "Of course not," I said. "She died 6 years ago." Margaret rubbed her temple. The confusion in her face was no performance. I had watched liars arrange expressions, invent pauses, and manufacture tears. Margaret was not inventing anything. She was trying to force 2 versions of her own life into one head, and they did not fit. Wolfe turned to Ruth. "You found Beatrice Harland's diary in Amos's apartment. Why were you there?" "He gave me a key 2 months ago. He said I should use it if anything happened to him." That implies expectation. He had been frightened. Of what? He would not say. Did he mention the anniversary? "Once. Last week, he asked whether I remembered the silver leaves." Margaret's fingers tightened. "What did you answer?" Wolfe asked. "I thought he meant the silver birches at the estate." When I asked him, he said it was nothing. Did he speak of your Aunt Margaret? Ruth glanced toward her. I did not know I had an Aunt Margaret, yet you recognized her? From the diary photograph. That photograph shows her face only partly. There were others. Wolfe's brows rose. Ruth opened the diary and turned several pages. Empty paper showed where photographs had once been fixed. Pale rectangular marks remained, with torn corners under the mounting strips. They were here when I found the book, she said. Pictures of the dinners. Some were recent. Margaret appeared in 3 of them. Where are they now? Gone. Who had access to the diary after you found it? No one. I put it in my handbag and came directly here. Did you leave the handbag unattended? At Amos's apartment for perhaps 2 minutes. I heard someone in the hall and went to look. Whom did you see? No one. I held out my hand. Let me see the bag. She gave it to me. It was dark leather with a brass clasp. The lock had not been forced. The lining held a compact, 2 pencils, a purse, a packet of tissues, and a small bottle of headache tablets. There was also a slit near the bottom seam. I pushed 2 fingers into it and found a narrow strip of photographic paper. It showed part of Wolfe's dining table, the edge of a silver bowl, and a woman's hand resting beside a place card. Only the first 3 letters of the name were visible. I handed it to Wolfe. Someone removed the pictures through the lining, I said. They missed a piece. Margaret did not reach for it. Wolfe studied the fragment. The hand wears a ring. She looked down at her own right hand. The ring was plain gold set with a square green stone. The hand in the photograph wore the same one. Ruth whispered, "You were there." Margaret stood so quickly that the chair moved backward. I remember a birthday. You remember an anniversary dinner and have given it another name, Wolfe said. Why would I do that? That is the question. She faced him. You think I am insane. I think your memory has been instructed. Memory cannot be instructed. It can be influenced, suppressed, confused, or replaced, usually imperfectly. Yours has preserved details while changing their meaning. I said, like filing a dinner under the wrong date. Wolfe nodded. The facts remain. The label has been altered. Margaret stared at the cake. Who could do that? Someone with repeated access to you, a knowledge of the family's history, and a reason to make the anniversary harmless. Ruth returned to her chair. The photographs were removed for the same reason. Not necessarily, Wolfe said. A photograph does not merely restore memory, it identifies people. Someone fears recognition. I went to the telephone and called the Harland estate. A man with a dry voice identified himself as Conrad's secretary and told me Mr. Harland was unavailable. I am asking about the family photograph albums, I said. What about them? Who has handled them recently? There was a pause. They are private. So is Mr. Harland's income, but it appears in tax records. I cannot help you. Put Conrad on. He is resting. Wake him. The secretary disconnected. I dialed again. This time the line was engaged. Wolfe said, Archie, visit the estate. Now, after lunch. You expect Conrad to open the albums? I expect him to resist. Resistance is often more informative. The doorbell rang before I could reply. A uniformed messenger stood outside with a flat parcel wrapped in brown paper. It was addressed to Margaret Harland at Wolfe's house. Who sent it? I asked. He checked his slip. Picked up at a public telephone booth on Madison Avenue. Delivery paid in cash. I signed and carried it inside. Margaret refused to touch. Wolfe told me to open it. The parcel contained a large leather photograph album. Every page was empty. The mounting corners remained, but the pictures had been stripped away. On the inside cover, someone had written in black ink, "A family remembers only what it can survive." Beneath the sentence was a date. October 17th, 20 years earlier. Margaret made a small sound. Wolfe looked at her. What happened on that date? Nothing. Your answer is false. I do not remember. That is more acceptable. Ruth leaned toward her. Was someone killed? Margaret stared at the empty album. I remember waking in my room at the estate. It was morning. My dress was torn. There was blood on my sleeve. Whose blood? I asked. I was told it was mine. Were you injured? A cut on my hand. She lifted her left hand. A pale scar crossed the base of the thumb. Wolfe's gaze settled on it. And after that? He asked. My mother told me I had suffered a collapse. She said I had attacked someone during my father's birthday dinner. She sent me away to a private clinic. For how long? 14 months. Did your family visit? Amos did. Once. What did he tell you? Margaret swallowed. That I must never ask who had occupied the empty chair. The office became still. Wolfe picked up the fragment of photograph and examined the place card beside Margaret's hand. Only a narrow edge of the next card appeared beyond it. A single printed letter was visible. H. Wolfe turned to Fritz. At the first dinner, did the empty chair remain empty all evening? Fritz's lips parted. His eyes shifted toward the dining room. I thought it did. That is not an answer. Fritz closed his eyes. Then he said, After midnight, someone was sitting there. Margaret gripped the back of her chair. Who? Fritz opened his eyes. I cannot see the face. I remember only a man's hand beside the plate and a ring with a black stone. Ruth reached for the diary. My grandfather wore a black stone ring. Your grandfather was already at the table, I said. Wolfe shook his head. The person at the empty place was not Matthew Harland. How do you know? Ruth asked. Because Matthew is standing in the photograph while the person beneath the table wears the ring. He pushed the old picture toward me. I took the magnifying glass from the drawer and bent over it. Beneath the table, beside the hidden body, one hand lay palm down on the carpet. On its smallest finger was a ring set with a dark stone. I looked at Wolfe. The body was the person from the empty chair. Indeed. Margaret sank back into the red chair. Wolfe folded his hands over his middle. The anniversary was not established to honor a marriage, he said. It was established to commemorate a death. The empty place was not symbolic. Each year, the Harlands reserved it for a specific person. Ruth's voice was barely audible. Who? Wolfe looked at the blank album, the severed photograph, and the smashed silver leaves preserved in Beatrice Harland's diary. That, he said, is the name someone has spent 20 years erasing. Chapter 4. A Death Without a Name. The Harland estate was in Westchester, which meant that a man could leave Manhattan with a reasonable opinion of civilization and arrive 40 minutes later among stone walls, private roads, and people who regarded doorbells as a form of trespassing. I reached the entrance shortly after 2. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still grey enough to make the house look guilty. It stood at the end of a long drive between bare maples, 3 stories of dark stone with narrow windows and a roof designed to discourage cheerfulness. 2 carved lions guarded the steps. Neither looked friendly. A housemaid admitted me after. I gave Wolfe's name. She had been instructed to take me to the library, which suggested that Conrad Harland had expected my visit, though not necessarily with pleasure. The family was gathered around a tea table pretending October 17th was an ordinary day. Conrad stood at the fireplace with a cup in one hand. Ellen sat erect on a green sofa. Miles was examining his fingernails. Lila Harland occupied a chair near the window and looked expensive, composed, and slightly bored. Ruth was absent. So was Amos, but no one had set an empty place for him. Conrad did not offer me tea. You have 10 minutes, he said. I usually need 12 to be offensive. You may use fewer. I took a chair without invitation. Wolfe wants to know why the anniversary dinner was cancelled. There was no anniversary dinner. Fritz ordered 2 ducks, wild mushrooms, and an almond cake. Then your cook made an error. Fritz does not make culinary errors. He regards them as personal insults. Ellen placed her cup carefully on its saucer. Mr. Goodwin, our parents never held dinners at Mr. Wolfe's house. You attended one last year. I did not. You complained that the dining room, candles were smoking. I have never been in that dining room. Miles looked up from his fingers. Perhaps you dreamed it. I do not usually dream about your aunt's complaints. My sleep has standards. Conrad's mouth tightened. I took the photograph fragment from my pocket and laid it on the table. It showed Margaret's hand, the green stone ring, and part of the place card beside her. Lila leaned forward. Ellen did not move. Do you recognize the hand? I asked. Conrad glanced at it. It proves nothing. It proves Margaret was at Wolfe's table. There is no Margaret Harland. I watched his face. He had said it too quickly. Interesting, I said. You did not ask. Which Margaret? His eyes hardened. Ellen picked up her cup again. Margaret was a disturbed cousin who died many years ago. Conrad turned toward her. It was only a glance, but it carried a warning. I said, she was in Wolfe's office this morning, and for a dead cousin she looked healthy. The cup rattled against Ellen's saucer. Miles laughed, but there was no amusement in it. Lila looked from Conrad to Ellen. Conrad put his tea down. Margaret is not a member of this family. She says she is your sister. She is a liar. She remembers your father's birthday dinner. My father's birthday was in May. That is what Ruth said. Margaret remembers October 16th as his birthday because someone changed the label on the memory. Conrad came away from the fireplace. This interview is finished. Not yet. Amos disappeared last night. That is his concern. He told his doorman he was coming to West 35th Street. He often made irrational statements. Was he irrational? When he removed your mother's diary from this house. That landed. Ellen stared at me. Miles stopped smiling. Lila's eyebrows rose. Conrad said, You have the diary? Ruth has it. She had no right to enter Amos's apartment. She had a key. What is in the diary? Ellen asked. Conrad turned on her. Be quiet. It was the first honest sentence anyone had spoken since I entered. I stood. I would like to see the family photograph albums. They are private, Conrad said. They are empty. His face remained still, but Ellen's did not. You knew that, I told her. She looked away. Conrad stepped between me and the door. You will leave now. I will leave after I look at the study. You will do nothing of the kind. Then call the police. Inspector Kramer would enjoy hearing why you are protecting a room connected with a missing man. That was a bluff with decent tailoring. Kramer knew nothing about the study, and neither did I. But in a house like that there was always a locked room, and men like Conrad were always afraid of it. His eyes shifted toward the hall. That told me where to go. I moved before he decided whether to grab me. I went through the doorway, turned left, and saw a paneled door at the end of the corridor. Conrad called my name. Miles came after me. The study door was locked. I took out my pocket knife. Miles caught my arm. He was taller than I was, younger, and foolish enough to think those facts settled matters. I turned, removed his hand from my sleeve, and placed him against the wall with enough force to disturb a portrait of Matthew Harland. Conrad stopped 6 feet away. You assault my son in my house? He was badly positioned. The lock was old and meant for privacy, not defense. It took less than a minute. I entered and closed the door behind me, though Conrad immediately began pounding on it. The study smelled of leather, dust, and the cold ashes of old cigars. Books lined 3 walls. Matthew Harland's desk stood beneath the windows, broad enough to conduct a war from. The 4th wall held a large family tree painted directly onto plaster. Several names had been scraped away. Crossed to the desk. Its drawers were locked, but one had not been closed completely. A corner of white card showed through the gap. Outside, Conrad ordered someone to fetch a key. I pulled the drawer open far enough to reach inside. My fingers found a packet tied with black ribbon. It contained old place cards, each edged in silver. Conrad, Harland, Ellen Harland, Amos Harland, Margaret Harland, Matthew Harland, Beatrice Harland. There were others bearing the names of later guests, including Ruth, Miles, and Lila. At the bottom was one card stained dark brown along one edge, Samuel Harland. The door opened. Conrad entered with a brass key in his hand. Miles stood behind him, rubbing his shoulder. Ellen and Lila remained in the corridor. I held up the card. Who was Samuel? Conrad stopped. For 1 second, his face had no defense. Then the walls came back. There has never been a Samuel Harland. His place card disagrees. It is a forgery. A forgery kept in your father's locked desk? I do not know how it came there. Was he the man at the empty place? Conrad crossed the room. Give me that. I put the card in my pocket. He reached for me. Before the family could enjoy another demonstration of poor positioning, a woman spoke. From the corridor, Mr. Conrad. She was small, bent, and at least 70. Her black dress was plain, her white hair drawn tightly back. She held a ring of household keys at her waist. Conrad turned. Mrs. Bell, return to the kitchen. The old woman was staring at me. Precisely, she was staring at the pocket where I had placed the card. I stepped into the corridor. Did you know Samuel Harland? I asked. Her face lost what little color it had. Conrad said, Do not answer him. Mrs. Bell's fingers closed around the keys. I moved close enough that she would not need to raise her voice. Who was Samuel? Her eyes went toward Conrad, then Ellen. He was the eldest, she whispered. Conrad seized her wrist. That is enough. I removed his hand. This time I did it gently, since Mrs. Bell was between us. The eldest, what? I asked. Son, she said. Mr. Matthews. First son. Ellen leaned against the doorframe. Miles stared at his father. You told me you were the eldest. Conrad ignored him. I asked Mrs. Bell, what happened to Samuel? Her lips trembled. He died. When? During the anniversary dinner. Which anniversary dinner? She looked confused by the question. The one last year. The corridor became very quiet. I took out my notebook. Last year on October 16th? Yes. Here at the estate? She shook her head. At Mr. Wolfe's house, Conrad said sharply. She is senile. Mrs. Bell flinched. I kept my eyes on her. How old was Samuel when he died? She frowned, struggling with numbers. 36. Conrad was over 60. If Samuel had died at 36 only a year ago, he would have been younger than the brother who called himself the eldest. Did you see his body? I asked. Yes. Where? Under the table. Ellen made a choking sound. Mrs. Bell touched her forehead. There was cake on the floor. Silver leaves. Mr. Amos was kneeling beside him. Miss Margaret had blood on her dress. The scene she described matched the photograph taken 20 years earlier. Mrs. Bell, I said, that dinner did not happen last year. It happened 20 years ago. Ruth reached for the diary. My grandfather wore a black stone ring. Your grandfather was already at the table, I said. Wolfe shook his head. The person at the empty place was not Matthew Harland. How do you know? Ruth asked. Because Matthew is standing in the photograph while the person beneath the table wears the ring. He pushed the old picture toward me. I took the magnifying glass from the drawer and bent over it. Beneath the table, beside the hidden body, one hand lay palm down on the carpet. On its smallest finger was a ring set with a dark stone. I looked at Wolfe. The body was the person from the empty chair. Indeed. Margaret sank back into the red chair. Wolfe folded his hands over his middle. The anniversary was not established to honor a marriage, he said. It was established to commemorate a death. The empty place was not symbolic. Each year, the Harlands reserved it for a specific person. Ruth's voice was barely audible. Who? Wolfe looked at the blank album, the severed photograph, and the smashed silver leaves preserved in Beatrice Harland's diary. That, he said, is the name someone has spent 20 years erasing. Chapter 4. A Death Without a Name. The Harland estate was in Westchester, which meant that a man could leave Manhattan with a reasonable opinion of civilization and arrive 40 minutes later among stone walls, private roads, and people who regarded doorbells as a form of trespassing. I reached the entrance shortly after 2. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still grey enough to make the house look guilty. It stood at the end of a long drive between bare maples, 3 stories of dark stone with narrow windows and a roof designed to discourage cheerfulness. 2 carved lions guarded the steps. Neither looked friendly. A housemaid admitted me after. I gave Wolfe's name. She had been instructed to take me to the library, which suggested that Conrad Harland had expected my visit, though not necessarily with pleasure. The family was gathered around a tea table pretending October 17th. Was an ordinary day. Conrad stood at the fireplace with a cup in one hand. Ellen sat erect on a green sofa. Miles was examining his fingernails. Lila Harland occupied a chair near the window and looked expensive, composed, and slightly bored. Ruth was absent. So was Amos, but no one had set an empty place for him. Conrad did not offer me tea. "You have 10 minutes," he said. "I usually need 12 to be offensive. You may use fewer." I took a chair without invitation. "Wolfe wants to know why the anniversary dinner was cancelled." There was no anniversary dinner. Fritz ordered 2 ducks, wild mushrooms, and an almond cake. Then your cook made an error. Fritz does not make culinary errors. He regards them as personal insults. Ellen placed her cup carefully on its saucer. "Mr. Goodwin, our parents never held dinners at Mr. Wolfe's house. You attended one last year." "I did not. You complained that the dining room, candles were smoking." "I have never been in that dining room." Miles looked up from his fingers. "Perhaps you dreamed it." "I do not usually dream about your aunt's complaints. My sleep has standards." Conrad's mouth tightened. I took the photograph fragment from my pocket and laid it on the table. It showed Margaret's hand, the green stone ring, and part of the place card beside her. Lila leaned forward. Ellen did not move. "Do you recognize the hand?" I asked. Conrad glanced at it. "It proves nothing. It proves Margaret was at Wolfe's table. There is no Margaret Harland." I watched his face. He had said it too quickly. "Interesting," I said. "You did not ask." "Which Margaret?" His eyes hardened. Ellen picked up her cup again. "Margaret was a disturbed cousin who died many years ago." Conrad turned toward her. It was only a glance, but it carried a warning. I said, "She was in Wolfe's office this morning, and for a dead cousin she looked healthy." The cup rattled against Ellen's saucer. Miles laughed, but there was no amusement in it. Lila looked from Conrad to Ellen. Conrad put his tea down. "Margaret is not a member of this family. She says she is your sister. She is a liar. She remembers your father's birthday dinner." "My father's birthday was in May. That is what Ruth said. Margaret remembers October 16th as his birthday because someone changed the label on the memory." Conrad came away from the fireplace. "This interview is finished." "Not yet. Amos disappeared last night. That is his concern. He told his doorman he was coming to West 35th Street. He often made irrational statements." "Was he irrational?" "When he removed your mother's diary from this house." That landed. Ellen stared at me. Miles stopped smiling. Lila's eyebrows rose. Conrad said, "You have the diary?" "Ruth has it. She had no right to enter Amos's apartment. She had a key." "What is in the diary?" Ellen asked. Conrad turned on her. "Be quiet." It was the first honest sentence anyone had spoken since I entered. I stood. "I would like to see the family photograph albums." "They are private," Conrad said. "They are empty." His face remained still, but Ellen's did not. "You knew that," I told her. She looked away. Conrad stepped between me and the door. "You will leave now." "I will leave after I look at the study." "You will do nothing of the kind." "Then call the police." Inspector Kramer would enjoy hearing why you are protecting a room connected with a missing man. That was a bluff with decent tailoring. Kramer knew nothing about the study, and neither did I, but in a house like that there was always a locked room, and men like Conrad were always afraid of it. His eyes shifted toward the hall. That told me where to go. I moved before he decided whether to grab me. I went through the doorway, turned left, and saw a paneled door at the end of the corridor. Conrad called my name. Miles came after me. The study door was locked. I took out my pocket knife. Miles caught my arm. He was taller than I was, younger, and foolish enough to think those facts settled matters. I turned, removed his hand from my sleeve, and placed him against the wall with enough force to disturb a portrait of Matthew Harland. Conrad stopped 6 feet away. "You assault my son in my house?" He was badly positioned. The lock was old and meant for privacy, not defense. It took less than a minute. I entered and closed the door behind me, though Conrad immediately began pounding on it. The study smelled of leather, dust, and the cold ashes of old cigars. Books lined 3 walls. Matthew Harland's desk stood beneath the windows, broad enough to conduct a war from. The 4th wall held a large family tree painted directly onto plaster. Several names had been scraped away. Crossed to the desk. Its drawers were locked, but one had not been closed completely. A corner of white card showed through the gap. Outside, Conrad ordered someone to fetch a key. I pulled the drawer open far enough to reach inside. My fingers found a packet tied with black ribbon. It contained old place cards, each edged in silver. Conrad, Harland, Ellen Harland, Amos Harland, Margaret Harland, Matthew Harland, Beatrice Harland. There were others bearing the names of later guests, including Ruth, Miles, and Lila. At the bottom was one card stained dark brown along one edge, Samuel Harland. The door opened. Conrad entered with a brass key in his hand. Miles stood behind him, rubbing his shoulder. Ellen and Lila remained in the corridor. I held up the card. Who was Samuel? Conrad stopped. For 1 second, his face had no defense. Then the walls came back. There has never been a Samuel Harland. His place card disagrees. It is a forgery. A forgery kept in your father's locked desk? I do not know how it came there. Was he the man at the empty place? Conrad crossed the room. Give me that. I put the card in my pocket. He reached for me. Before the family could enjoy another demonstration of poor positioning, a woman spoke. From the corridor, Mr. Conrad. She was small, bent, and at least 70. Her black dress was plain, her white hair drawn tightly back. She held a ring of household keys at her waist. Conrad turned. Mrs. Bell, return to the kitchen. The old woman was staring at me. Precisely, she was staring at the pocket where I had placed the card. I stepped into the corridor. Did you know Samuel Harland? I asked. Her face lost what little color it had. Conrad said, Do not answer him. Mrs. Bell's fingers closed around the keys. I moved close enough that she would not need to raise her voice. Who was Samuel? Her eyes went toward Conrad, then Ellen. He was the eldest, she whispered. Conrad seized her wrist. That is enough. I removed his hand. This time I did it gently, since Mrs. Bell was between us. The eldest, what? I asked. Son, she said. Mr. Matthews. First son. Ellen leaned against the doorframe. Miles stared at his father. You told me you were the eldest. Conrad ignored him. I asked Mrs. Bell, what happened to Samuel? Her lips trembled. He died. When? During the anniversary dinner. Which anniversary dinner? She looked confused by the question. The one last year. The corridor became very quiet. I took out my notebook. Last year on October 16th? Yes. Here at the estate? She shook her head. At Mr. Wolfe's house, Conrad said sharply. She is senile. Mrs. Bell flinched. I kept my eyes on her. How old was Samuel when he died? She frowned, struggling with numbers. 36. Conrad was over 60. If Samuel had died at 36 only a year ago, he would have been younger than the brother who called himself the eldest. Did you see his body? I asked. Yes. Where? Under the table. Ellen made a choking sound. Mrs. Bell touched her forehead. There was cake on the floor, silver leaves. Mr. Amos was kneeling beside him. Miss Margaret had blood on her dress. The scene she described matched the photograph taken 20 years earlier. Mrs. Bell, I said, that dinner did not happen last year. It happened 20 years ago. She looked at me with frightened eyes. That cannot be. Why? Because Samuel spoke to me last Christmas. Conrad stepped forward. This ends now, I faced him. Not a chance. He pointed toward the front of the house. Leave, or I will have you removed. Before I go, I need one thing. You will get nothing. I turned to Mrs. Bell. What did Samuel say last Christmas? She closed her eyes. He asked whether the family still kept his place at the table. Conrad reached for her again, but Lila moved between them. Let her speak, she said. It was the first time she had joined the conversation, and Conrad looked at her as if the furniture had objected to him. Mrs. Bell continued. He said Amos had found the records. He said the truth would return on the next anniversary. Did you see his face? He stood outside the servants' entrance. It was dark. He wore a hat. Did you recognize his voice? I thought I did. You thought it was Samuel? Yes. Even though you believed Samuel had died? Tears appeared in her eyes. I did not know what I believed. That was the trouble with the Harland house. Everybody had memories, but none of them had dates that stayed put. I returned the packet of place cards to the drawer, keeping Samuel's. On the underside of the stained card was a handwritten notation I had not noticed before. 8 places. 1 witness absent. The handwriting was Amos's. I had seen enough of it in Wolfe's files to be sure. Beneath the words was a telephone number with a Manhattan exchange. I copied it into my notebook. Conrad watched me. What did you find? An appetite for dinner. I walked to the front hall. No one tried to stop me. Mrs. Bell remained near the study, holding her keys and staring at the floor. Miles was demanding an explanation from his father. Ellen had begun to cry quietly. Lila stood apart, studying Conrad with the calm attention of a woman reconsidering her marriage. At the door, I turned. Samuel existed, I said. He died under Wolfe's dining table 20 years ago, but your housekeeper remembers it as last year. Someone later came here using his voice, or a voice she associated with him. Amos found evidence and disappeared. You may keep pretending October 17th is ordinary, but it is getting crowded with ghosts. Conrad's face was grey. You have no proof Samuel is dead. It was an odd thing to say, especially after denying he had ever lived. I smiled at him. Thank you. Wolfe likes gifts. Outside, the air had sharpened. I went down the stone steps, past the unfriendly lions, and reached the road before opening my notebook again. The Manhattan telephone number beside Amos's note looked familiar. I had called it that morning while searching for the photographer whose mark appeared on the first dinner picture, H. Vale. According to the directory, the number belonged to Henry Vale, photographic restorer, East 22nd Street. Ellen Harland's married name was Vale. I found a public telephone at a filling station 2 miles from the estate and called Wolfe. He answered. On the 4th ring, report. Samuel Harland was Matthew's first son. The family erased him. Mrs. Bell says he died under your table during the anniversary dinner, but she thinks it happened last year instead of 20 years ago. Indeed. She also claims Samuel spoke to her last Christmas. Impossible statements are frequently useful. There is more. Amos left a telephone number on Samuel's place card. It belongs to Henry Vale, the photographer whose mark is on the old picture. A pause. Ellen's husband? That would be my guess. Do not guess. Verify. I was planning to visit him. Do so. Take care. That was Wolfe's version of affection. He used it sparingly. Before he could hang up, I said, "Conrad made a mistake." "What mistake?" "He denied Samuel existed. Then, when I said Samuel was dead, Conrad told me I had no proof." Wolfe was silent for 2 seconds. "Excellent. Is it? A man who insists that another man never lived does not defend the possibility that he remains alive. So Conrad knows Samuel survived the scene under the table, or knows that someone did." The line clicked dead. I returned the receiver and looked through the filling station window at the wet road leading back toward Manhattan. We had begun with a forgotten anniversary. Now we had a forgotten brother, a death remembered in the wrong year, a photographer tied to the family, and a place card preserved in a locked desk for a man who had been erased from every album. Someone had spent 20 years making Samuel Harland disappear. The difficulty was that Samuel Harland might not have stayed disappeared. Chapter 5. The TAS. Doctor's Convenient Treatment. By the time I returned to West 35th Street, I had learned 3 things about Henry Vale. The first was that he had been married to Ellen Harland for 28 years. The second was that he had once owned a successful portrait studio on Madison Avenue, but now worked alone above a locksmith shop on East 22nd Street, restoring photographs for museums and wealthy families who preferred their ancestors, without cracks, stains, or inconvenient relatives. The third was that he had disappeared. His landlord had not seen him for 4 days. The studio door was locked, the mail was piled beneath it, and a strip of photographic film had been wedged into the frame from the inside. I had not forced my way in because a patrolman was drinking coffee across the street and watching me with professional interest. I brought Wolfe the information shortly before 6. He was behind his desk with a bottle of beer, the old Harland photograph, Samuel's place card, and Beatrice Harland's diary arranged before him. Margaret and Ruth had gone. Fritz was in the kitchen expressing his opinion of the case through the firm handling of pots. Wolfe listened without interrupting. "Henry Vale restores photographs," I concluded. "Photographs disappear from the Harland albums. His mark appears on the picture of the first dinner. Amos wrote Vale's telephone number on Samuel's place card. Vale has now vanished. Either he is in trouble or he has excellent timing." Wolfe opened the beer and poured. "Did you speak with his wife?" Ellen refused. Conrad's secretary said the family had no comment. The family has had no comment for 20 years. They have had plenty of comments. None of them have been useful. Wolfe watched the foam settle. "Saul telephoned while you were away. Amos Harland took a taxi from his apartment at 7:36 last evening. The driver remembers him because Amos changed the destination twice. Where did he go? First he requested West 35th Street, then East 22nd Street. He left the cab near Henry Vale's studio at 8:11. So Amos went to see Vale, presumably, and neither has been seen since." "Correct." I sat at my desk and pulled Samuel's place card from my pocket. The stain along its edge looked like dried wine, though in the Harland case I was no longer willing to trust any stain without an affidavit. "What about Kramer?" "He is coming." "Did you tell him we have 2 missing men?" I told him. "One missing man may have visited another missing man. That should improve his digestion." The doorbell rang at 6:20. I expected Kramer. Instead, a narrow man of about 60 stood on the stoop, holding a black medical bag. He had smooth gray hair, rimless spectacles, and a face constructed to express patient concern without committing itself to sympathy. "Dr. Owen Mercer," he said. "Mr. Wolfe requested my presence." I admitted him and took his coat. Mercer entered the office with the confidence of a man accustomed to being trusted before he spoke. He nodded to Wolfe, glanced at me, and sat in the red leather chair. "You said this concerned the Harlands." "It concerns Samuel Harland," Wolfe replied. Mercer's eyes remained steady. "There is no Samuel Harland." That answer is popular. "It is also true." Wolfe picked up the place card. This was found in Matthew Harland's locked study. Mercer looked at it from a distance. "A name on a card proves very little." Mrs. Bell, who has served the Harlands for more than 40 years, identified Samuel as Matthew's eldest son. Mrs. Bell is 81 and has suffered periods of confusion. She described his death under my dining table. The doctor's expression altered only slightly. She misunderstood an old family story. Which story? I would have to know precisely what she said. You have already said she misunderstood it. Mercer adjusted one cuff. I mean that elderly people frequently combine different events. They attach the wrong names to remembered scenes. An interesting diagnosis, Wolfe said. Particularly in this case. Mercer leaned back. Why? Because incorrect names and displaced dates have become common among the Harlands. That is an exaggeration. Margaret Harland remembers an anniversary dinner as a memorial for her father's birthday. Mrs. Bell remembers a death 20 years ago as occurring last year. Conrad and Ellen deny the dinners occurred at all. Ruth recognizes photographs of events she cannot recall attending. Mercer removed his spectacles and polished them with a white handkerchief. Margaret has a history of emotional disturbance. Do you treat her? I did, many years ago. At the private clinic where she remained for 14 months, his hand paused. You appear well informed. I prefer facts before opinions. Mercer replaced his spectacles. Margaret suffered a severe breakdown after a family quarrel. Her recollection of that period has never been reliable. What treatment did you prescribe? That is confidential, even after 20 years. Medical confidence does not expire. Wolfe's lips compressed. Confidentiality is admirable when it protects a patient. Less so when it protects a physician. Mercer's voice cooled. I did not come here to be insulted. You came because Conrad Harland asked you to learn what I know. Mercer stood. I came because you telephoned my office. And Conrad telephoned you 5 minutes later. The doctor stopped. I had not known that, but Wolfe occasionally threw a stone into dark water to hear where it landed. Mercer said, I speak to Conrad often. I am the family physician. Indeed. You have treated the Harlands for nearly 30 years. Their bodies, habits, fears, and medicines are known to you. I see nothing sinister in that. Nor do I. Sit down. Mercer hesitated, then obeyed. Wolfe rang for beer. Fritz entered with another bottle and a glass for Mercer, who declined both. Fritz looked at him longer than courtesy required. You remember Dr. Mercer? Wolfe asked. Fritz nodded slowly. He attended the first Harland dinner. Mercer turned. I did not. You came after midnight, Fritz said. I opened the door. Mercer's face remained composed, but a small muscle moved near his jaw. You are mistaken. Fritz's eyes hardened. I may forget a face. I do not forget a man who ordered me out of my own dining room. That is enough, Fritz, Wolfe said. Fritz withdrew, though the manner of his withdrawal suggested he was saving the rest for later. Wolfe lifted his glass. Why did you come to my house after midnight on October 16th, 20 years ago? I repeat that I did not. Margaret awoke the next morning with blood on her dress and no memory of several hours. Fritz remembers you entering and then recalls nothing until morning. Mrs. Bell has confused the same event with a recent one. This is not ordinary forgetfulness. Mercer crossed one leg over the other. You are building a theory from damaged memories. Possibly. Let us discuss undamaged records. I opened the lower drawer of my desk and removed the folder Wolfe had asked me to collect before I went to East 22nd Street. It contained copies of pharmacy invoices obtained by Saul Panzer through methods I had not asked him to describe. Wolfe said, following last year's anniversary dinner, you prescribed Somnirel to Conrad, Ellen, Amos, Margaret, Ruth, Miles, Lila, and Mrs. Bell. Mercer looked at me. I smiled pleasantly. Wolfe continued. The prescriptions were issued over a period of 3 days. Different symptoms were listed, but the dosage was nearly identical. Somnirel is a sleeping medicine. Recently approved, yes. Known to cause confusion, vivid dreams, and temporary gaps in memory when combined with alcohol. Mercer's eyes shifted toward the papers. Those reactions are uncommon. 8 prescriptions are not. The family had undergone a period of stress. What stress? Private matters. Connected with the anniversary dinner? There was no anniversary dinner. You prescribed the medicine immediately after an event you claimed did not exist. Mercer's voice sharpened. You are twisting coincidence into evidence. Coincidence is often a name given to arrangement by the person who arranged it. I said, Ruth had wine at the dinner. So did Miles and Lila. Conrad had brandy. Afterward, you gave them all a drug that behaves badly with alcohol. Mercer turned to me. I gave them a safe medicine in proper doses. Then why does Ruth remember the silver bowl but not the dinner? She may be suggestible. Why? Does Margaret remember the dinner as something else? Her illness predates the drug by 20 years. Why does Conrad deny an event documented in Wolfe's appointment book, Fritz's ledger, and the accounts of 3 suppliers? Mercer did not answer. Wolfe leaned back. The medicine did not erase 20 years of recollection. It blurred. A recent evening. Someone then exploited that confusion by removing photographs, altering household records, repeating false explanations, and encouraging each person to distrust his own memory. Mercer's brows drew together. You are describing an absurd conspiracy. A difficult deception, not an impossible one. The Harlands were already trained to accept uncertainty. 20 years ago, a violent event was concealed by persuading witnesses that their memories were unreliable. Last year, the method was repeated. You cannot prove that. I can prove you supplied the instrument. Mercer's hand closed around the handle of his medical bag. What do you want? The truth. That is not a practical demand. It is the only practical one. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Kramer. He entered the office without waiting for ceremony, removed his hat, and gave Mercer a look that contained neither trust nor affection. Inspector Kramer was built like a man who had been told life was a fight and had decided not to disappoint. What is he doing here? He asked. Answering questions badly, I said. Kramer looked at Wolfe. You told me Amos Harland is missing. And Henry Vale. Vale's studio was broken into last night. I sat forward. What was I taken? Photographs, negatives, and some chemical records. The place was cleaned out. There was blood near the sink. Enough for a body. Enough for an injury. Mercer's fingers tightened on his bag. Kramer noticed. You know Vale? He asked. I know the family. Answer the question. Yes. When? Did you last see him? Several weeks ago. Wolfe said. That is false. Mercer turned. You cannot know that. Henry Vale telephoned your office yesterday afternoon. Mercer's face changed. This time there was no mistaking it. Kramer stepped closer. How do you know? Wolfe nodded toward me. Archie. I handed Kramer a copy of Vale's telephone record. Saul had obtained it less than an hour earlier. The final outgoing call from the studio had been made to Mercer's private office at 4:17 the previous afternoon. It lasted 8 minutes. Kramer read it and looked up. What did Vale want? Mercer stood. I am leaving. Kramer placed one hand on his shoulder and put him back in the chair. You will leave when I say. I am not under arrest. You are not making me happy either. Mercer stared at Wolfe. You think I drugged the family to erase their memories? No, Wolfe said. That surprised everyone except Wolfe. Mercer blinked. Then what are you accusing me of? I'm not yet accusing you. The medicine was too uncertain to create the effects required. It could cause gaps, but not precise. Substitutions. It could make Ruth forget part of a dinner, but it could not teach Margaret to call the anniversary a birthday memorial. It could confuse Mrs. Bell's dates, but it could not remove photographs from locked albums. Kramer growled. Then why are we talking about pills? Because Dr. Mercer provided confusion. Someone else provided the story placed inside it. Mercer looked toward the door. Wolfe continued. After the previous dinner, each Harland received the drug. During the following days, someone visited or telephoned them separately. That person repeated the same falsehoods until uncertainty became conviction. Conrad and Ellen were encouraged to deny the tradition. Margaret was told the dinner honored her father's birthday. Mrs. Bell was persuaded the old death had occurred. Recently, Ruth was left with fragments she could not organize. I said, and the photographs were removed so nobody could compare memory with evidence. Precisely. Kramer looked at Mercer. Who did the talking? Mercer said nothing. Wolfe's voice dropped. Henry Vale discovered what had been done. As a photographer, he possessed the original negatives. As Ellen's husband, he knew the family history. Amos found the altered records and went to him. Yesterday Vale telephoned you because he feared the deception was about to end. Mercer's face had gone grey. What did he say? Wolfe asked. The doctor looked down at his bag. Kramer took a step forward. Talk. Mercer swallowed. He said Amos had found Samuel. The room was silent. I said, found him alive. Mercer shook his head. Found what? A file. A medical file. Where? Kramer demanded. In Vale's studio, hidden behind a wall panel. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Whose file? Mercer removed his spectacles. His hand was trembling. Now, Samuel Harland's. You said Samuel never existed, I reminded him. Mercer looked at the floor. He existed. Did he die at Wolfe's house? Kramer asked. I do not know. Wolfe snapped. Pfui! You treated him. Mercer lifted his head. Yes. What was wrong with him? Nothing. Then why was there a medical file? Because Matthew Harland wanted one. Kramer's voice became rough. Explain that. Mercer wiped his spectacles though they were clean. Samuel was Matthew's eldest son, but not Beatrice's. Matthew had been married before. The first marriage was concealed because his wife had been committed to an institution and later died there. Samuel was raised away from the family. When he returned as an adult, Matthew intended to acknowledge him. At the first anniversary, dinner, Wolfe said. Yes, which would have changed the inheritance. Mercer nodded. Conrad would no longer be the eldest, I said. His share and control of the estate would be threatened. Conrad was furious. Ellen was frightened. Beatrice believed the revelation would destroy the family. And Margaret? Wolfe asked. She supported Samuel. Wolfe's eyes went to the old photograph. What occurred after midnight? Mercer's mouth opened, but the words did not. Come. Kramer said. You were there? Yes. You saw Samuel under the table? Yes. Was he dead? Mercer closed his eyes. I believed so. Believed. He had no pulse. There was blood near his head. Conrad said Margaret had struck him with a silver candlestick. Margaret's blood-stained dress and missing hours suddenly acquired a shape. Did she? I asked. I did not see the blow. What did you do? Mercer's voice became faint. I gave them sedatives. All of them? Those who had. Witnessed the scene. Beatrice insisted. She said Margaret was ill and the scandal would ruin everyone. Henry Vale had taken photographs. Matthew ordered him to surrender the negatives. Did he? Not all of them, Wolfe said, and Samuel's. Body? Mercer looked at Kramer, then at Wolfe. When I returned to the dining room, it was gone. Kramer stared at him. A corpse walked away? I did not say he was a corpse. Where did he go? I never learned. Wolfe's fingers pressed against the arms of his chair. You have spent 20 years claiming Samuel never existed, because you did not know whether he was dead. Mercer nodded miserably. And last year, Vale told me someone had begun asking about the negatives. He feared the family would be exposed. Conrad demanded that I help prevent another breakdown. So you prescribed Somnarel, I said. Yes. To every witness, yes. Who told them the false stories afterward? Mercer looked toward the old photograph. I do not know. Wolfe studied him for several seconds. That is another. Lie. Mercer's head came up. Before Wolfe could continue, the telephone rang. I answered. Saul Panzer was on the line. Archie, he said, I found Amos. Alive? Yes, but he is hurt. He was locked in the basement under Vale's studio. Where is Vale? Not here. Can Amos talk? A little. What does he say? There was a pause. He says the wrong man has been missing. For 20 years, I looked at Wolfe. His eyes had closed to narrow slits. "Bring Amos here," he said. I relayed the instruction. Kramer frowned. "What does that mean?" Wolfe picked up Samuel's place card. "It means," he said, "that we have been asking whether Samuel Harland died during the first dinner." He turned the card over and examined Amos's note. "We should have asked which Harland left the house afterward." Chapter 6. The photograph. Behind the mirror Amos. Harland arrived at the brownstone at 7:45 in an ambulance, which was not his preferred method of transportation, but had the advantage of clearing traffic. Saul Panzer came with him. Amos had a bandage around his head, a bruise along his jaw, and the look of a man who had recently discovered that family loyalty was a poor substitute for a strong basement door. He was carried into the front room and examined by a Dr. Kramer had brought along. Wolfe objected to converting his house into a hospital, but he objected from his chair and did not order Amos removed. Dr. Mercer remained in the office under Kramer's supervision. He had stopped polishing his spectacles and started watching the door. When Amos was permitted to speak, Wolfe had him placed in the red leather chair with a cushion behind his neck. Amos looked smaller than I remembered. His damp hands were folded together, and his eyes kept moving toward Mercer. Wolfe said, "You went to Henry Vale's studio last night?" "Yes." "Why?" "Henry telephoned me. He said he had found something behind an old portrait frame." "What?" "Samuel's medical records and several negatives from the first dinner." "Did you see them?" "Only the file." "Before Henry could show me the negatives, someone entered through the rear door." "Whom?" "I did not see his face. The lights went out. I was struck from behind." "Henry Vale!" I heard him shout. Then I heard something fall. "You awoke." "In the basement?" Amos nodded. My wrists were tied. The door was locked. "Who freed you?" "Mr. Panzer." Saul, standing near the globe, said, "The basement window had been painted shut." Amos broke one pane with a length of pipe and pushed a strip of cloth through it. "A delivery man noticed it this afternoon." Kramer glared at him. "And you happened to be there before the police." I was looking carefully. Wolfe turned back to Amos. "What did you mean when you said the wrong man had been missing for 20 years? Amos swallowed. "I meant Samuel did not disappear." "After the dinner?" "Then who did?" Amos looked at Conrad's empty place in our collection of facts, though Conrad himself was miles away. "My brother Daniel." I was standing beside my desk. I stopped pretending to arrange papers. "Your family records contain no Daniel Harland," I said. "They do," Amos replied. "You know him as Conrad." That earned silence. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "His full name?" "Daniel Conrad Harland." He began using Conrad after the first dinner. My mother said the name Daniel had become painful to her. "Convenient," I said. Amos looked at me. "Everything became convenient after that night." Wolfe leaned back. "Explain the distinction between Samuel and Daniel." Samuel was my father's son by his first wife. Daniel was the eldest child of my father and Beatrice. Samuel was older by 6 years and legally the first heir. Conrad knew this before the dinner? He learned it that afternoon. Father intended to announce Samuel's position to the family that night, and Samuel had discovered that Daniel was stealing from the company. Amos stared at Wolfe. "How did you know?" "I did not. You have now confirmed it." Amos closed his eyes. Kramer made a disgusted noise, but he had seen Wolfe do it before. Wolfe continued. "What happened after the announcement?" Samuel accused Daniel of taking money from Harland Consolidated. He had records showing false invoices and payments to companies that did not exist. Daniel said Samuel had forged them to seize control. Father demanded proof. Did Samuel have it? Yes. He had placed copies somewhere in the estate. Where? I never knew. Did Henry Vale photograph the documents? I think so. Kramer stepped closer. What happened to Samuel? Amos's fingers tightened. He drank wine. A few minutes later, he fell beside the table. Poison? Kramer asked. Dr. Mercer said his heart had stopped. Mercer spoke from the yellow chair. I said I could find no pulse. You also said he was dead, Amos replied. I was under pressure. You were always under pressure when Conrad needed you. Mercer looked away. Wolfe said, And Daniel? He disappeared before dawn. Yet Daniel Conrad Harland has lived openly as Conrad Harland for 20 years. Amos shook his head. The man calling himself Conrad came back. 3 days later. That put a chill into the office despite the fire. I said, Are you claiming he was not your brother? I did not know. He had Daniel's face, voice, and habits. But after the dinner there were differences, small ones. He stopped using his left hand when he wrote. He forgot the name of the pony we had shared as boys. He called Margaret by a childhood name only Samuel had used. Margaret had said the family altered memories. Perhaps the alterations had included more than dates. Wolfe asked, Why did you remain silent? My mother told me grief had confused. Me, Dr. Mercer gave me medicine. My father ordered us never to discuss Samuel again. 3 days later, Conrad returned and said he had been hiding because he feared arrest for Samuel's death. Did you believe him? I wanted to. That is not the same thing. I know. Wolfe closed his eyes. After 10 seconds, he opened them and looked at me. Archie, return to the estate. Kramer objected. My men can search it. Your men will search for documents. Archie will search for a memory. That sentence means nothing. It means the place where Samuel hid the proof was probably associated with Margaret. She supported him. He would trust her room. Margaret had occupied a bedroom on the 2nd floor until she was sent to the clinic. If the family had erased her, they might have left the room untouched or converted it into something harmless. I got my coat. Kramer sent Sergeant Stebbins and 2 uniformed men with me, partly to protect evidence and partly to keep me from opening more doors with my knife. The Harland estate looked worse at night. Light showed in only a few windows, and the carved lions had collected rain in their mouths. Conrad met us in the hall. He looked at Stebbins, then at me. You have no warrant. Stebbins produced one. Conrad read it and said nothing. Lila stood, on the staircase behind him. Ellen was nowhere in sight. We need Margaret's old room, I said. There is no such room. That family phrase is wearing thin. Lila spoke from the stairs. The blue bedroom. Conrad turned toward her. She came down slowly. It has been locked since before our marriage. You told me the ceiling was unsafe. Return upstairs. I have spent 12 years returning upstairs whenever you lied downstairs. She pointed toward the eastern corridor. The blue room is at the end. Conrad moved to block us. Stebbins placed a hand on his arm. Do not make this entertaining, the sergeant said. The room was locked, but Mrs. Bell appeared with her ring of keys before anyone needed my knife. She did not look at Conrad. She selected a narrow brass key and handed it to me. The blue bedroom smelled of closed curtains and old lavender. A white cover lay over the bed. The furniture had been left exactly as Margaret might have known it 20 years earlier. A hairbrush rested on the dressing table. 3 books stood beside the lamp. A faded ribbon was tied around the bedpost. There was a large mirror above the fireplace. Its frame had been screwed to the wall. I looked at Stebbins. Memory, I said. He grunted. Search it. The screws were old, but one had scratches around its head. Someone had removed it more recently than the others. We took the mirror down and found a shallow recess cut into the plaster. Inside was a photograph wrapped in waxed paper. The picture showed Wolfe's dining room on the night of the first anniversary dinner, but it had been taken earlier than the photograph in Beatrice's diary. The cake was still intact. The silver leaves shone under the candles. Samuel Harland stood beside it. I knew at once why the family had been able to erase him. He resembled Conrad closely enough to confuse a stranger, though not closely enough to fool a brother. Samuel was taller and leaner, with a scar near his left eyebrow. He wore a black stone ring on his smallest finger. Beside him stood the man we called Conrad. On the back, Henry Vale had written Samuel and Daniel before the announcement. Under the photograph was a folded sheet of company stationery. It listed payments made by Harland consolidated to 4 businesses. Each business shared the same address, a private postal box in Manhattan. The payments had been authorized by Daniel C. Harland. I held the sheet for Stebbins. This is what Samuel found. There was more in the recess. A handwritten note signed by Samuel Margaret. If father refuses to act, Henry has photographed the ledgers. Daniel knows I have discovered the theft. He has threatened me twice. During dinner, I will tell them all. Keep this safe. A second photograph lay beneath it. This one showed the table after Samuel had collapsed. His body was visible on the carpet. Amos knelt beside him. Margaret stood near the broken cake. Mercer bent over Samuel's chest, at the edge of the picture. Daniel held a wine bottle. The label faced the camera. Only one glass on the table contained red wine. It stood beside Samuel's place card. Stebbins said, "That does not prove poison. It proves Daniel controlled the bottle." Behind us, Mrs. Bell whispered, "He changed the glass." We turned. She stood in the doorway, gripping her keys. "Who did?" I asked. "Mr. Daniel. Before Mr. Samuel drank, Mr. Daniel moved the glasses. I thought one had a spot on it. Did you tell anyone? Dr. Mercer told me I had imagined it." Stebbins looked at the doctor's absence as if it were personally offensive. I asked, "What happened after Samuel collapsed?" Mrs. Bell pressed a hand to her mouth. "Mr. Matthew ordered everyone from the room. Mr. Henry kept taking pictures. Mr. Daniel struck him and seized the camera. Miss Margaret screamed that Samuel had been poisoned. And then Dr. Mercer gave us something to drink. The sedative?" She nodded. "When I woke, they said Miss Margaret had attacked Samuel and Mr. Daniel had run away in terror. But Daniel returned 3 days later." Her face crumpled. Someone returned. Conrad spoke from behind her. "That is enough." He stood in the corridor with a pistol in his right hand. Stebbins reached toward his holster. Conrad aimed at his chest. "Keep your hand still." I looked at the gun, then at Conrad. Amos had said Daniel was left-handed before the dinner. The man in front of us held the pistol in his right hand with the confidence of long practice. "You made a mistake," I said. His eyes moved to me. "What mistake?" "Amos remembers Daniel writing with his left hand. You write with your right." I injured my left wrist as a young man. Daniel did not have a scar above his eyebrow either. His face changed. I held up the photograph showing Samuel beside Daniel. "You look more like Samuel than you look like Daniel." Mrs. Bell made a sound behind me. Stebbins said quietly, "Put the gun down." The man called Conrad smiled. It was not Conrad's public smile from the newspaper. It was thin, tired, and almost relieved. "You still do not understand," he said. "You were poisoned," I replied. "Mercer thought you were dead, but you survived. Daniel vanished, and 3 days later you returned using his middle name and took his place." His grip on the pistol tightened. "Why would Samuel become the man who tried to kill him?" Stebbins asked. "Money," I said. "The same reason Daniel poisoned Samuel. Samuel had discovered theft, but after surviving he saw a better opportunity. If Daniel had fled, Samuel could take Daniel's identity, inherit Beatrice's share, control the company, and let the family believe Samuel was dead." The man's eyes went to the hidden papers. "You are guessing. So is Wolfe, but he is better at it than I am." A floorboard creaked behind Conrad. Lila stood at the far end of the corridor holding a brass fireplace shovel. She swung it against his wrist. The pistol fired into the ceiling. Stebbins hit him before the plaster stopped falling. They went down, together. I retrieved the gun while one of the uniformed men secured his wrists. The man who had called himself Conrad lay on the carpet, breathing hard. Lila looked at him. "Which one are you?" He closed his eyes. "Samuel." Mrs. Bell began to cry. I found a telephone in the upstairs hall and called Wolfe. "Conrad is Samuel," I said. "He survived the poisoned wine and returned under Daniel's name. Daniel disappeared. We found photographs and records behind Margaret's mirror. Daniel had been stealing from the company, and Samuel threatened to expose him during dinner. Where is Samuel now? On the floor, with Stebbins sitting on him. A suitable arrangement. He admits his name. That is helpful, but not sufficient. What is missing? The poisoned glass. It was 20 years ago. Poison explains Samuel's collapse. It does not explain Daniel's disappearance, Henry Vale's absence, the recent drugging of the family, or Amos's imprisonment. I looked down the corridor. Samuel was being pulled to his feet. His face had lost Conrad's arrogance. Underneath, it was the exhausted expression of a man who had worn another identity too long. So Samuel is not our killer, I said. He may be a killer. He is not necessarily the architect. Who is? Wolfe's voice became impatient. Bring everyone here tomorrow evening. Samuel, Margaret, Ellen, Amos, Ruth, Miles, Lila, Dr. Mercer, Mrs. Bell, and Henry Vale, if Mr. Kramer can find him. For the office gathering? For dinner first. I looked at the photograph of the silver leaf cake. The anniversary dinner? Indeed. The empty chair will be occupied. By whom? Wolfe paused. By the person who truly died 20 years. Argo. Chapter 7. The memory that was rewritten. At 6:30 the following evening, Wolfe's office contained enough Harlands to discourage any reasonable man from believing in heredity. Samuel Harland sat in the red leather chair under the guard of Sergeant Stebbins. For 20 years he had called himself Conrad, and the name still clung to him better than the handcuffs. The bandage on his right wrist marked where Lila's fireplace shovel had interrupted his career as a gunman. Margaret occupied the yellow chair. Ruth sat beside her on a straight-backed chair brought from the dining room. Amos had been placed near the fireplace with a cushion behind his injured head. Ellen and Miles shared the leather couch without looking at each other. Lila sat apart, wearing dark blue and the composed expression of a woman who had struck her. Husband learned he was not her husband and decided that neither fact required an apology. Dr. Owen Mercer stood near the bookshelves. Inspector Kramer had allowed him no chair, perhaps because Kramer considered comfort a privilege rather than a right. Mrs. Bell sat near the door, with her hands folded over her household keys. Henry Vale was the only invited guest absent. Kramer's men had not found him. The dining room had been prepared for 8, just as Wolfe had ordered. Fritz had served oyster stew, roast duck with chestnut dressing, glazed onions, watercress with apples, and walnut cake. The silver bowl of white roses had stood in the center. At the far end of the table, one chair had remained empty. Nobody had asked for whom it was intended. They had all looked at it. That had been enough. Now coffee had been served in the office. Wolfe sat behind his desk with the old photographs, Beatrice's diary, Samuel's place card, the company records, and the medical invoices arranged before him. I occupied my desk with my notebook open. Kramer looked at his watch. You said you would explain this. I shall, Wolfe said. You said that 20 minutes ago. I was eating. You have finished. Digestion does not begin by proclamation. Kramer made a noise, but Wolfe had closed his eyes. The office remained quiet until he opened them again. He looked first at Samuel. You have confessed your identity, but not your purpose. Samuel's right hand rested on the arm of the chair. His left was secured to Stebbins by a short chain. I have nothing more to say. You have much to say. Whether it will be true is another matter. Samuel's mouth tightened. Wolfe turned to the others. The difficulty before us has not been a shortage of evidence. It has been an excess of false memory. A photograph was called a forgery. A dinner became a birthday memorial. A death 20 years old was remembered as recent. A living woman was treated as dead, and a living man wore the identity of his vanished brother. Margaret looked towards Samuel. He avoided her eyes. Wolfe continued. The Harland anniversary was never merely a family custom. It was a mechanism. Every year the same people gathered in the same room, ate the same food, heard the same music, and saw the same empty chair. Repetition should have preserved memory. Instead, it weakened it. Ruth frowned. How could repetition weaken it? Because The dinner was not used to remember what occurred. It was used to replace it. Wolfe picked up the photograph showing Samuel beside the silver leaf cake. At the first dinner 20 years ago, Matthew Harland intended to acknowledge Samuel publicly as his eldest son and principal heir. Samuel had also discovered that Daniel Conrad Harland, the man this family later called Conrad, had stolen large sums from Harland Consolidated. Miles looked at Samuel. "My father was Daniel?" "The man who fathered you was Daniel Harland," Wolfe said. "The man who raised you after your infancy was Samuel." Miles's face lost color. Samuel said, "That is not relevant." "It is relevant to Mr. Miles Harland." Miles stared at him. "Did my father know you took his place?" Samuel's jaw moved. Wolfe answered for him. "Your father could not object." "Because he was dead?" "That conclusion is premature." Kramer slapped his hat against his knee. "You brought us here to explain, not to arrange another puzzle." "I am arranging nothing. The Harlands have done enough arranging." Wolfe turned to Dr. Mercer. At the first dinner, Samuel accused Daniel of theft. Daniel had already prepared an answer. He moved the wine glasses and gave Samuel a drink containing a substance intended to stop his heart. Under the photograph was a folded sheet of company stationery. It listed payments made by Harland Consolidated to 4 businesses. Each business shared the same address, a private postal box in Manhattan. The payments had been authorized by Daniel C. Harland. I held the sheet for Stebbins. This is what Samuel found. There was more in the recess. A handwritten note signed by Samuel Margaret. "If father refuses to act, Henry has photographed the ledgers. Daniel knows I have discovered the theft. He has threatened me twice. During dinner, I will tell them all. Keep this safe." A second photograph lay beneath it. This one showed the table after Samuel had collapsed. His body was visible on the carpet. Amos knelt beside him. Margaret stood near the broken cake. Mercer bent over Samuel's chest, at the edge of the picture. Daniel held a wine bottle. The label faced the camera. Only one glass on the table contained red wine. It stood beside Samuel's place card. Stebbins said, "That does not prove poison. It proves Daniel controlled the bottle." Behind us, Mrs. Bell whispered, "He changed the glass." We turned. She stood in the doorway, gripping her keys. "Who did?" I asked. "Mr. Daniel. Before Mr. Samuel drank, Mr. Daniel moved the glasses. I thought one had a spot on it. Did you tell anyone?" "Dr. Mercer told me I had imagined it." Stebbins looked at the doctor's absence as if it were personally offensive. I asked, "What happened after Samuel collapsed?" Mrs. Bell pressed a hand to her mouth. "Mr. Matthew ordered everyone from the room. Mr. Henry kept taking pictures. Mr. Daniel struck him and seized the camera. Miss Margaret screamed that Samuel had been poisoned. And then Dr. Mercer gave us something to drink. The sedative?" She nodded. "When I woke, they said Miss Margaret had attacked Samuel and Mr. Daniel had run away in terror. But Daniel returned 3 days later." Her face crumpled. "Someone returned." Conrad spoke from behind her. "That is enough." He stood in the corridor with a pistol in his right hand. Stebbins reached toward his holster. Conrad aimed at his chest. "Keep your hand still." I looked at the gun, then at Conrad. Amos had said Daniel was left-handed before the dinner. The man in front of us held the pistol in his right hand with the confidence of long practice. "You made a mistake," I said. His eyes moved to me. "What mistake?" "Amos remembers Daniel writing with his left hand. You write with your right. I injured my left wrist as a young man." Daniel did not have a scar above his eyebrow either. His face changed. I held up the photograph showing Samuel beside Daniel. "You look more like Samuel than you look like Daniel." Mrs. Bell made a sound behind me. Stebbins said quietly, "Put the gun down." The man called Conrad smiled. It was not Conrad's public smile from the newspaper. It was thin, tired, and almost relieved. "You still do not understand," he said. "You were poisoned," I replied. "Mercer thought you were dead, but you survived. Daniel vanished, and 3 days later you returned using his middle name and took his place." His grip on the pistol tightened. Why would Samuel become the man who tried to kill him? Stebbins asked. Money, I said. The same reason Daniel poisoned Samuel. Samuel had discovered theft, but after surviving, he saw a better opportunity. If Daniel had fled, Samuel could take Daniel's identity, inherit Beatrice's share, control the company, and let the family believe Samuel was dead. The man's eyes went to the hidden papers. You are guessing. So is Wolfe, but he is better at it than I am. A floorboard creaked behind Conrad. Lila stood at the far end of the corridor holding a brass fireplace shovel. She swung it against his wrist. The pistol fired into the ceiling. Stebbins hit him before the plaster stopped falling. They went down, together. I retrieved the gun while one of the uniformed men secured his wrists. The man who had called himself Conrad lay on the carpet, breathing hard. Lila looked at him. Which one are you? He closed his eyes. Samuel. Mrs. Bell began to cry. I found a telephone in the upstairs hall and called Wolfe. Conrad is Samuel, I said. He survived the poisoned wine and returned under Daniel's name. Daniel disappeared. We found photographs and records behind Margaret's mirror. Daniel had been stealing from the company, and Samuel threatened to expose him during dinner. Where is Samuel now? On the floor, with Stebbins sitting on him. A suitable arrangement. He admits his name. That is helpful, but not sufficient. What is missing? The poisoned glass. It was 20 years ago. Poison explains Samuel's collapse. It does not explain Daniel's disappearance, Henry Vale's absence, the recent drugging of the family, or Amos's imprisonment. I looked down the corridor. Samuel was being pulled to his feet. His face had lost Conrad's arrogance. Underneath, it was the exhausted expression of a man who had worn another identity too long. So Samuel is not our killer, I said. He may be a killer. He is not necessarily the architect. Who is? Wolfe's voice became impatient. Bring everyone here tomorrow evening. Samuel, Margaret, Ellen, Amos, Ruth, Miles, Lila, Dr. Mercer, Mrs. Bell, and Henry Vale, if Mr. Kramer can find him. For the office gathering? For dinner first. I looked at the photograph of the silver leaf cake. The anniversary dinner? Indeed. The empty chair will be occupied. By whom? Wolfe paused. By the person who truly died 20 years. Argo. Chapter 7. The memory that was rewritten. At 6:30 the following evening, Wolfe's office contained enough Harlands to discourage any reasonable man from believing in heredity. Samuel Harland sat in the red leather chair under the guard of Sergeant Stebbins. For 20 years he had called himself Conrad, and the name still clung to him better than the handcuffs. The bandage on his right wrist marked where Lila's fireplace shovel had interrupted his career as a gunman. Margaret occupied the yellow chair. Ruth sat beside her on a straight-backed chair brought from the dining room. Amos had been placed near the fireplace with a cushion behind his injured head. Ellen and Miles shared the leather couch without looking at each other. Lila sat apart, wearing dark blue and the composed expression of a woman who had struck her. Husband learned he was not her husband and decided that neither fact required an apology. Dr. Owen Mercer stood near the bookshelves. Inspector Kramer had allowed him no chair, perhaps because Kramer considered comfort a privilege rather than a right. Mrs. Bell sat near the door, with her hands folded over her household keys. Henry Vale was the only invited guest absent. Kramer's men had not found him. The dining room had been prepared for 8, just as Wolfe had ordered. Fritz had served oyster stew, roast duck with chestnut dressing, glazed onions, watercress with apples, and walnut cake. The silver bowl of white roses had stood in the center. At the far end of the table, one chair had remained empty. Nobody had asked for whom it was intended. They had all looked at it. That had been enough. Now coffee had been served in the office. Wolfe sat behind his desk with the old photographs, Beatrice's diary, Samuel's place card, the company records, and the medical invoices arranged before him. I occupied my desk with my notebook open. Kramer looked at his watch. You said you would explain this. I shall, Wolfe said. You said that 20 minutes ago. I was eating. You have finished. Digestion does not begin by proclamation. Kramer made a noise, but Wolfe had closed his eyes. The office remained quiet until he opened them again. He looked first at Samuel. "You have confessed your identity, but not your purpose." Samuel's right hand rested on the arm of the chair. His left was secured to Stebbins by a short chain. "I have nothing more to say." "You have much to say. Whether it will be true is another matter." Samuel's mouth tightened. Wolfe turned to the others. "The difficulty before us has not been a shortage of evidence. It has been an excess of false memory. A photograph was called a forgery. A dinner became a birthday memorial. A death 20 years old was remembered as recent. A living woman was treated as dead, and a living man wore the identity of his vanished brother." Margaret looked towards Samuel. He avoided her eyes. Wolfe continued. "The Harland anniversary was never merely a family custom. It was a mechanism. Every year the same people gathered in the same room, ate the same food, heard the same music, and saw the same empty chair. Repetition should have preserved memory. Instead, it weakened it." Ruth frowned. "How could repetition weaken it?" "Because the dinner was not used to remember what occurred. It was used to replace it." Wolfe picked up the photograph showing Samuel beside the silver leaf cake. At the first dinner 20 years ago, Matthew Harland intended to acknowledge Samuel publicly as his eldest son and principal heir. Samuel had also discovered that Daniel Conrad Harland, the man this family later called Conrad, had stolen large sums from Harland Consolidated. Miles looked at Samuel. "My father was Daniel?" "The man who fathered you was Daniel Harland," Wolfe said. "The man who raised you after your infancy was Samuel." Miles's face lost color. Samuel said, "That is not relevant." "It is relevant to Mr. Miles Harland." Miles stared at him. "Did my father know you took his place?" Samuel's jaw moved. Wolfe answered for him. "Your father could not object." "Because he was dead?" "That conclusion is premature." Kramer slapped his hat against his knee. "You brought us here to explain, not to arrange another puzzle." "I am arranging nothing. The Harlands have done enough arranging." Wolfe turned to Dr. Mercer. At the first dinner, Samuel accused Daniel of theft. Daniel had already prepared an answer. He moved the wine glasses and gave Samuel a drink containing a substance intended to stop his heart. Mercer said, "I never identified the substance." "You did not try." "I examined him. You placed 2 fingers against his neck, announced that he had no pulse, and then obeyed Beatrice Harland." Mercer's face hardened. "The family was in chaos." "Chaos is not a medical diagnosis," Kramer said. "Was Samuel dead or not?" "Obviously not," I said. "He is making the furniture look nervous." Wolfe glanced at me, then resumed. Samuel collapsed. Daniel expected him to die. Margaret accused Daniel of poisoning him. Henry Vale continued taking photographs. Beatrice demanded silence. Matthew, fearing scandal and the ruin of the company, ordered the doors closed. Mrs. Bell stared at the floor. Wolfe said, "Dr. Mercer administered a strong sedative to Margaret, Amos, Ellen, Mrs. Bell, and Fritz. Matthew and Beatrice took smaller doses. Henry Vale resisted until Daniel struck him and seized his camera." "That is not what happened," Mercer said. Wolfe's eyes fixed on him. "Which detail do you dispute?" Mercer opened his mouth, then closed it. "The sedative did not remove memory," Wolfe continued. "It produced confusion, fatigue, and missing intervals. Those conditions were useful but insufficient. Drugs cannot compose a lie. They merely provide blank paper." He turned one palm upward. Daniel supplied the writing. Ellen spoke for the first time. "Daniel vanished that night." "Did you see him leave?" "No." "Did anyone?" She looked toward Amos. Amos shook his head. Wolfe said, "You were told he had fled because he feared blame for Samuel's death. You were also told Margaret had struck Samuel with a candlestick. The blood on Margaret's dress was presented as proof, though it came from the cut on her hand and from kneeling beside Samuel. Margaret's fingers moved to the scar at the base of her thumb. My mother said I attacked him. Your mother lied." The words struck her harder than any accusation. Wolfe continued. Beatrice Harland believed the family could survive murder, theft, and fraud if it agreed upon a simpler tragedy. Samuel would be dead. Daniel would be a frightened fugitive. Margaret would be ill. The photographs would disappear. The company records would be corrected. Ruth looked at Samuel. But Samuel survived. Yes. During the confusion, he regained consciousness. His pulse had been weakened, not stopped. Amos found him breathing. All eyes turned to Amos. He lowered his head. Wolfe said, "You concealed that fact." Amos's voice was barely audible. "He begged me." "Where did you take him?" "To a room above the garage. Henry helped me." "Why did you not call?" "Another doctor?" "Samuel said Mercer was loyal to Daniel. He believed another attempt would be made," Mercer protested. "I did not know Daniel had poisoned him." "You suspected it," Wolfe said. "I had no proof. You had a patient with sudden cardiac failure after one glass of wine and a family demanding that no authority be notified. A competent physician would have had questions." Mercer looked away. Wolfe addressed Amos again. Samuel recovered sufficiently to leave the estate before dawn. Daniel had disappeared by then. "Yes." Samuel believed Daniel had fled. "He told me so." And 3 days later, Samuel returned wearing Daniel's clothes and calling himself Conrad. Amos closed his eyes. "I knew it was him." "Did the others?" "My mother did." Margaret turned toward him. "You knew?" Amos's face folded with pain. "I was afraid." "For 20 years?" "I was afraid every day." Wolfe's voice was merciless. "Fear improves neither with age nor repetition." Samuel leaned forward. "You have made your point. I have not begun to make it." He settled back. Wolfe lifted Samuel's place card. The substitution solved several problems. If Samuel remained dead, Daniel would inherit control once Matthew died. If Samuel returned as himself, he would have to accuse Daniel, explain his own survival, and expose the entire family's conduct. But if Samuel became Daniel, he could assume Daniel's position, conceal his own illegitimacy in Beatrice's eyes, inherit through the accepted line, and search privately for the missing brother. Lila said, "You told me Daniel was dead." Samuel looked at her. "I believed he was." "When did you begin believing that?" He did not answer. Wolfe did. When Daniel failed to return. Samuel concluded that the poison had been prepared too clumsily to guarantee death, and that Daniel, frightened by his failure, had escaped. Later, when no trace of him appeared, Samuel accepted the more convenient possibility that Daniel had died while fleeing. Kramer said, "Convenient for Samuel." "Extremely." Wolfe turned to the photographs. Henry Vale retained negatives from the dinner. He also knew that the man who returned after 3 days was Samuel, not Daniel. At first he remained silent, because Ellen begged him. Later he restored selected photographs and hid them where Margaret or Amos might find them. Ellen covered her face with one hand. "You knew too?" Ruth asked. Ellen nodded. "How long?" "From the beginning." Miles stood. "You let him raise me." Ellen looked at him. "You were a baby." Beatrice said the truth would destroy the family. "The family seems to have managed that without the truth," I said. Miles went to the window and stood with his back to us. Wolfe waited until he was still. Each anniversary dinner renewed the agreement. The empty chair represented Samuel, whom the family publicly treated as dead. Its true occupant, Samuel himself, sat opposite it under Daniel's name. Ruth shivered. He attended his own memorial. Precisely. The cruelty of the arrangement was useful. Each year, the family repeated a false account until the falsehood acquired ritual. They did not discuss Samuel's accusation. They spoke instead of loyalty, grief, and survival. Memory became a servant of ceremony. Margaret said, "Why did I remember the dinners as Father's birthday?" "Because last year the deception changed." Wolfe looked at Mercer. Dr. Mercer prescribed Somnirel to every person likely to question the anniversary. The medicine, combined with wine, caused incomplete recall. But again, the medicine did not create the substitute memory. Then who did? Kramer asked. Samuel. The room stirred. Samuel laughed once. That is absurd. You telephoned each member of the family during the week after the dinner, Wolfe said. You visited Mrs. Bell twice. You told Margaret that the gathering had commemorated her father's birthday. You told Ruth she had left before dinner because of a headache. You instructed your secretary to remove October 16th from the household calendars and company records. You persuaded Ellen to deny the tradition entirely. Ellen whispered. He said it was the only way to protect Miles. Miles turned from the window. Protect me from what? From learning your father was a thief and an attempted murderer. His face became rigid. Samuel said, I was protecting all of them. Wolfe's brows rose. Thank you. Samuel realized too late that he had abandoned denial. Wolfe continued. You feared that Henry Vale intended to reveal the negatives. Amos had begun comparing Beatrice's diary with the company files. Margaret's memories were returning. Ruth had asked about the silver leaves. The anniversary had become dangerous, because remembering it would mean remembering Samuel's final accusation against Daniel. Kramer said, So Samuel cancelled the dinner? Yes. He arranged for the altered menu and silver leaf cake to be delivered here as a test. A test of what? I asked. Of who remembered, Wolfe indicated Margaret. The caller, using her name, changed the menu to reproduce the meal served on the night of the poisoning. Samuel wished to learn whether Fritz would recognize it. 2 days later, another caller asked whether the dinner had been confirmed. That was Ellen, attempting to discover whether Samuel had cancelled it without consulting her. Ellen looked startled. You recognized my voice? Fritz did not. But you spoke to him annually regarding flowers after Beatrice's death. The uncertainty was his, not mine. Fritz, who had entered quietly with a tray of coffee, looked satisfied. Margaret said, Who ordered the cake with the inscription? Henry Vale. She stared at Wolfe. Why? To force the past into view. He used Beatrice's words because he knew Fritz might remember them. He also planted the letter in our Harland file. I frowned. How did he enter the house? Fritz answered. The furnace inspector. Wolfe nodded. A man inspected the basement heating system on October 10th. His credentials were false. You admitted him through the service entrance, and for 7 minutes he was alone in the hall while you answered the kitchen telephone. Fritz's expression darkened at having been maneuvered. Henry Vale wished me to investigate, Wolfe said. He could not approach openly because Samuel watched him. He circled Amos in the photograph because Amos was the only family member he trusted to confirm the events after midnight. Ruth leaned forward. Then Henry tried to expose Samuel. He tried to expose the entire construction. Kramer looked at Samuel. And you attacked Vale's studio? Samuel's face was unreadable. Wolfe said, He did not. Kramer's head snapped around. You just spent 10 minutes explaining that Samuel rewrote everyone's memory. He did. That makes him guilty of fraud, coercion, unlawful drugging by conspiracy, and several other offenses you may catalogue. It does not make him responsible for Amos's imprisonment or Henry Vale's disappearance. Who is? Wolfe picked up the medical invoice. The person who understood the deception better than Samuel did. The person who prescribed the drug knew how it would affect each patient and lied about visiting my dining room 20 years ago. Mercer went still. Kramer stepped toward him. Wolfe said, Do not arrest him yet. Why not? Because Dr. Mercer is not the architect either. Mercer exhaled. Wolfe regarded him with contempt. He is a coward who has served several architects. That is enough, Mercer said. It was enough 20 years ago. It is not enough now. Wolfe turned to Mrs. Bell. Madam, when you said Samuel spoke to you last Christmas, you heard a man at the servants' entrance, but did not clearly see his face. She nodded. He asked whether the family still kept his place at the table. Yes. You assumed the speaker was Samuel because he referred to the empty chair. Yes. But Samuel was living inside the house under Daniel's name. He had no need to visit the servants' entrance in darkness. Mrs. Bell stared at him. Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. The caller was Daniel. Nobody moved. Miles spoke first. "My father is alive." Wolfe opened his eyes. He was alive last Christmas. Samuel's face had become grey. "That is impossible. Your fondness for that word has not improved its reliability. I searched for him for years. You searched for a fugitive. Daniel did not flee as Daniel. He became another man, just as you became him." Margaret gripped the arm of her chair. "Henry found him." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Henry Vale restored an old photograph last year and recognized a face in the background of a recent company banquet. A face older by 20 years, altered by weight and hair, but still." "Daniels, who was he pretending to be?" I asked. Wolfe looked at Dr. Mercer. The doctor took one step backward. Kramer blocked him. Mercer's lips moved. "Do not," he whispered. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "You have protected him long enough." Samuel pulled against the handcuff. "Where is Daniel?" Mercer closed his eyes. Wolfe answered. Henry Vale's studio was not attacked to protect Samuel's impersonation. It was attacked to protect Daniel's new identity. Amos was imprisoned because he saw the medical file. Henry vanished because he recognized the man who had come for the negatives. Kramer said, "Name him." Wolfe looked toward the empty chair near the bookshelves, the chair deliberately left unoccupied since the gathering began. "The man calling himself Samuel Harland has not entered this office under that name." The doorbell rang. Every face turned toward the hall. I rose. Wolfe said, "Archie, admit our final guest." I went to the front door and opened it. A man stood on the stoop in a dark overcoat, holding his hat against the evening wind. He was in his late 50s, with a narrow face, iron-grey hair, and a pale scar running from his ear to his jaw. I had seen him before. He was Conrad Harland's secretary, the man who had repeatedly told me the family had no comment. He looked past me toward the office. "Mr. Wolfe asked me to come." "Your name?" "Martin Dale." Behind me, Wolfe's voice carried through the hall. "That is the name you have used for 19 years. The man's hand tightened around his hat. I stepped aside. "Come in, Daniel." Chapter 8. The Anniversary. Restored Martin Dale stood inside the front door and looked at me as if he were deciding whether a polite man could commit murder in a hallway. He could have tried. His right hand moved toward the inside of his overcoat, but I was already close, enough to catch his wrist. I turned him toward the wall, removed a small automatic pistol from the shoulder holster beneath his coat, and guided him into the office. The movement brought Samuel to his feet. Daniel. The name came out of him like something dragged across. Broken glass. Martin Dale stopped. For 20 years, the two brothers had occupied each other's lives without sharing a room. Samuel had worn Daniel's name, inherited his position, raised his child, and sat at the head of his table. Daniel had hidden behind a secretary's desk, arranging appointments, controlling correspondence, and watching Samuel live the life he had tried to steal. They looked less alike now than they had in Henry Vale's photograph. Time had thickened Samuel and narrowed Daniel. Samuel's hair was silver and carefully cut. Daniel's was iron-grey and brushed straight back, yet the shape of the jaw, the deep-set eyes, and the line of the mouth belonged unmistakably to the same family. Daniel looked at Wolfe. "You asked to see me." "I asked Martin Dale to come," Wolfe said. "Samuel Harland came because he could not refuse." Kramer held out his hand. I gave him the pistol. He examined it, slipped it into his pocket, and pointed Daniel toward the empty chair near the bookshelves. "Sit." Daniel remained standing. "I prefer to hear the accusation first." "You will hear it more comfortably seated," Wolfe said. Daniel's eyes moved around the room, measuring doors, windows, and men. Stebbins stood beside Samuel. Kramer blocked the path to the hall. Saul Panzer had taken a position near the globe. I was behind Daniel and had already found his gun. He sat. Wolfe regarded him with open distaste. "Your ability to calculate is considerable," he said. "Your judgment is contemptible." Daniel smiled slightly. "That sounds like an opinion." "It is a preface." Wolfe placed one hand on the papers before him. 20 years ago, Samuel discovered that you had stolen money from Harland Consolidated. You created false suppliers, approved payments to them, and transferred the funds through accounts controlled by intermediaries. Samuel found the invoices and threatened to expose you during Matthew and Beatrice Harland's anniversary dinner. Daniel crossed one leg over the other. You have already told this story. I have stated Samuel's accusation. I shall now prove it. Wolfe nodded to me. I opened the safe and removed a narrow leather book wrapped in brown paper. I placed it on his desk. Samuel stared at it. "The wine ledger," he said. Daniel's expression did not change, but his crossed foot stopped moving. The ledger had been found 2 hours earlier by Saul Panzer in a storage locker rented under Henry Vale's name. Wolfe had predicted that Henry would not hide all his evidence in the studio. A photographer who preserved images for a living would understand the value of duplicate records. Wolfe opened the book. This ledger belonged to Lawrence Moore, a private wine merchant who supplied the Harland estate. His business closed 17 years ago. Henry Vale acquired the ledger from Moore's widow after recognizing the bottle in his photograph of the first dinner. Kramer leaned over the desk. "What does it show?" "A purchase made by Daniel Harland on October 14th, 2 days before the dinner. 1 bottle of a rare red wine from a small European vineyard. The wine itself was unimportant. The method of shipping was not." Daniel said, "People buy wine." "Indeed. They usually do not instruct the merchant to place a packet of medicinal powder beneath the bottle's wrapping." Mercer gripped the back of a chair. All eyes turned toward him. Wolfe continued. "Moore recorded the request because he considered it irregular. He wrote that the packet had been delivered to his shop by Dr. Owen Mercer and was to accompany the bottle without appearing on the invoice." Kramer looked at Mercer. "What was in the packet?" Mercer said nothing. Daniel spoke, calmly. "A dead merchant's note does not prove the contents." Wolfe's lips pushed forward. "Your reliance upon vanished evidence has sustained you for 20 years. It will not sustain you tonight." He took a small glass tube from the desk drawer. It contained a dark brown residue, no larger than a fingernail, clipping. This was preserved in Samuel Harland's medical file. Mercer's knees seemed to weaken. He lowered himself into the nearest chair without being invited. Wolfe said, "When Samuel collapsed, Dr. Mercer drew blood before announcing that he could find no pulse. He also collected a sample of what Samuel had vomited onto the carpet. He kept it, not from professional courage, but as protection against you." Kramer extended his hand for the tube. Wolfe gave it to him. "A laboratory analysis completed this afternoon identified a concentrated cardiac compound," Wolfe said. "In a large dose, it can slow the heart so severely that a hurried examination might mistake the patient for dead. It also produces weakness, confusion, and temporary paralysis." Samuel stared at Mercer. "You knew I was alive." "At first." "I did not," Mercer said. "You had the sample. I tested it later." "When?" "The next morning, and you said nothing." Mercer covered his face. Daniel's voice remained level. "Even if Samuel was poisoned, you cannot connect the substance to me." Wolfe lifted a sheet from the wine ledger. Lawrence Moore recorded the number printed on the medicine packet. It was part of a numbered batch issued to Dr. Mercer's private clinic. His prescription register contains the corresponding entry. Mercer looked up sharply. "That register was destroyed. You destroyed the book in your office. You neglected the duplicate filed with your clinic's dispensary." Daniel turned toward him. For the first time, the secretary's controlled expression broke. It was not fear. It was fury. Mercer shrank from it. Wolfe saw the exchange and nodded with satisfaction. The compound was prescribed under the name Martin. "Dale," he said. "That identity did not officially exist until nearly a year after the dinner, yet you were already using it to obtain medicine." Kramer stepped in front of Daniel. "You bought the drug, put it in Samuel's wine, and expected him to die." Daniel looked at Wolfe instead of Kramer. The wine bottle was on the table. "Anyone could have used it." "Only Samuel drank from it," Wolfe said. Mrs. Bell saw you exchange the glasses. Henry Vale photographed you holding the bottle after Samuel collapsed. The merchant recorded your instruction. Mercer's register connects the packet to your false name. The medical sample identifies the substance. Daniel's face had become hard and bloodless. Wolfe leaned back. You were desperate. Samuel's accusation threatened imprisonment, the loss of your inheritance, and your father's contempt. You poisoned him, believing his sudden collapse would be blamed upon a weak heart or upon Margaret's supposed instability. Margaret's voice was quiet. You put the candlestick in my hand. Daniel looked at her. You were already screaming. So you made me the murderer. I gave them an explanation they were willing to accept. Samuel pulled against his handcuff. Stebbins tightened his grip. Wolfe said, Restrain yourself. Your brother's guilt does not improve your innocence. Samuel sat, but his eyes remained fixed on Daniel. Kramer asked, What happened after Samuel collapsed? Daniel answered before Wolfe could. I left. That is incomplete, Wolfe said. It is true. You did not flee from fear of arrest. You fled because Samuel's body disappeared. Daniel's eyes sharpened. Wolfe continued. You returned to the dining room after Mercer had sedated the others. Samuel was gone. You concluded that Amos or Henry had discovered he was alive. If Samuel recovered, your crime would be exposed. You therefore left the estate and created the identity of Martin Dale. I had used that name before. For theft and illegal prescriptions, it was already useful. Wolfe tapped the desk. 3 days later, Samuel returned as Daniel Conrad Harland. You learned of the substitution through Dr. Mercer. At first, you intended to expose him. Then you understood the advantage. Daniel said nothing. Samuel's impersonation protected you, Wolfe continued. The family believed Daniel had returned and Samuel had died. If you revealed yourself, you would have to explain why 2 Daniels existed. Samuel would accuse you of poisoning him, and the company theft would be reopened. So you remained Martin Dale, I said. Then you got yourself hired as Samuel's secretary. Daniel's mouth twisted. Not immediately. 14 months. Later, Wolfe said, by then your appearance had changed, and the family had been taught to distrust its own recollections. Samuel recognized you when you applied. That surprised Samuel. He stared at Wolfe. You knew? Miles asked him. Samuel's face tightened. I suspected. You hired the man who tried to kill you? I needed to watch him. Daniel laughed. Softly. He needed me. Samuel could imitate my signature, but not my business knowledge. He knew nothing of the arrangements I had made, the accounts I controlled, or the people who believed they were dealing with Daniel Harland. Wolfe nodded. Thus, the brothers formed an unspoken partnership. Samuel occupied Daniel's public life. Daniel managed its concealed machinery. Each possessed enough information to destroy the other. Lila looked at Samuel with disgust. You let him remain beside you for 19 years. Samuel did not answer. Wolfe said, the anniversary dinner became their mutual prison. Each year the family gathered and renewed the fiction that Samuel was dead and Daniel had returned. Samuel sat before the empty chair reserved for himself. Daniel, as secretary, arranged schedules, removed letters, altered records, and made certain. The story remained intact. Ruth said, why erase the anniversary last year? Because Henry Vale had begun restoring the past, Wolfe replied. He glanced toward the empty chair at the end of the office. Henry found the wine ledger and recognized Martin Dale as Daniel. Amos discovered discrepancies in the company. Records. Margaret's memories were returning. Ruth asked about the silver leaves. Daniel realized that the annual dinner no longer reinforced the deception. It threatened it. Mercer's breathing was ragged. Wolfe looked at him. You supplied. Somniro. Mercer nodded. Speak clearly, Kramer said. The doctor removed his spectacles. Daniel came to my office before last year's dinner. He said Henry Vale had found the wine merchant's widow. He knew I had kept Samuel's medical sample. Why had you kept it? I asked. Insurance. Against Daniel? Against everyone. Kramer's face darkened. You preserved evidence of attempted murder for 20 years and used it as insurance. Mercer's shoulders sagged. I had issued prescriptions through false names. Some were for wealthy patients who did not want records. Some involved restricted drugs. Daniel arranged the payments and kept copies. Wolfe said, he threatened to expose you. Yes. So you prescribed the sleeping medicine to the family? Yes. To every witness? Yes. And after the dinner? I visited those Daniel said were unstable. Margaret, Mrs. Bell, Amos. I told them their confusion was caused by grief and exhaustion. Daniel telephoned the others and supplied the altered memories. Did you know Amos would be imprisoned? Kramer asked. Mercer shook his head rapidly. I knew. Nothing about that? Henry Vale? I warned Henry to leave the matter alone. That was not my question. Mercer looked at Daniel. Daniel's hands rested motionless in his lap. Mercer whispered, Daniel said he would recover the negatives. Kramer turned toward Daniel. Where is Vale? Daniel smiled without humor. You will have to ask him. We would, if we could find him. Wolfe rang the bell. Fritz entered, but he was not alone. Henry Vale came through the office door behind him. Ellen stood so quickly that her chair fell backward. Henry was bruised along one cheek and carried his left arm in a sling, but he was alive. He crossed the room without looking at Daniel and stopped beside his wife. She touched his sleeve. Where were you? At Saul Panzer's apartment. Kramer spun toward Saul. You hid a material witness? Saul remained calm. Mr. Wolfe believed Henry would be safer if Daniel thought he had disappeared. Kramer faced Wolfe. You obstructed an investigation. I preserved a witness. You could have told me. You were surrounded by Harland influence, compromised records, and a physician who had lied for 20 years. Discretion was indicated. Kramer's vocabulary became active, but Wolfe ignored it. Henry Vale looked at Daniel. You struck me in the studio, Daniel replied. You refused to surrender the ledger. You locked Amos in the basement. He saw my face after the lights came on. You left us to die. The basement had a window. Amos stared at him. You painted it shut. Daniel shrugged. It was the smallest movement in the room and the ugliest. Kramer removed handcuffs from his pocket. Daniel did not resist as the inspector secured his wrists. He merely looked at Samuel. You stole my life. Samuel's laugh was bitter. You tried to end mine, and then you became me, because you had destroyed everything else. Daniel stepped closer, though Kramer held his arm. You enjoyed it. Samuel had no answer. Wolfe said, Both of you found profit in the deception. Daniel began it with theft and poison. Samuel preserved it through impersonation. Dr. Mercer supplied drugs and medical lies. Beatrice and Matthew protected the family. Name. Ellen and Amos surrendered to fear. Henry concealed evidence until secrecy became more dangerous than disclosure. Ellen gripped Henry's good hand. What happens now? Kramer answered. Daniel comes downtown, Mercer too. Samuel will have questions to answer about fraud, identity documents, company records, and that gun he pointed at my men. Samuel looked at Wolfe. You have destroyed the Harland family. Wolfe's eyes closed halfway. Pfui, a detective, does not destroy a rotten structure by opening the curtains. Kramer took Daniel toward the door. Stebbins followed with Samuel. Mercer rose unsteadily and was placed between two uniformed officers. Miles remained by the window. Lila stood and collected her gloves. Amos seemed smaller than ever, but some of the fear had gone out of his face. Margaret approached Wolfe's desk. The empty chair, she said. You told Archie it would be occupied by the person who truly died 20 years ago. I was speaking figuratively. You dislike figurative speech. I dislike careless figurative speech. Who died? Wolfe looked at Samuel as he reached the office door. The man Samuel Harland had been. He abandoned his name, his accusation, and his claim to justice. Daniel killed nobody that night, but with the family's assistance, he killed a person. Samuel stopped. For a second, I thought he might speak. He did not. Kramer took him out. The office gradually emptied. Ellen left with Henry. Ruth supported Amos. Lila walked alone. Miles followed last. carrying neither Harland's certainty nor Harland. Pride, Margaret remained. "You remembered me," she said to Fritz. Fritz stood near the door. "I remembered the cake." That was enough. Wolfe looked at the clock. It was 9:40. "The dinner was interrupted," he said. Fritz understood. He went to the kitchen. 20 minutes later, we gathered in the dining room again. This time there were only 7 of us: Wolfe, Margaret, Ruth, Amos, Henry, Ellen, and me. I sat at Wolfe's right. Fritz had removed the traditional walnut cake and replaced it with the almond cake decorated with silver leaves. The inscription remained in the center: "For the one forgotten." At the far end of the table stood the empty chair. Margaret looked at it. "For Samuel?" she asked. Wolfe considered. "For the truth," he said. "It was absent longest." Fritz poured the wine. Nobody made a speech about loyalty. Nobody praised the Harland name. No one pretended the dinner honored a perfect marriage or a peaceful family. They spoke instead of what had happened. Amos admitted that he had helped Samuel leave the house. Ellen confessed that she had recognized him when he returned as Daniel. Henry described keeping the negatives because he feared Beatrice would destroy them. Margaret listened without being told that her memories were illness. Ruth asked questions, and for once the answers did not change their dates. Wolfe ate 2 portions of duck and gave Fritz a grave nod over the wild mushrooms. That was the highest public praise available in the brownstone. When the almond cake was served, Margaret lifted 1 silver leaf from the icing and placed it on the empty plate. Fritz stopped beside her. "For the one forgotten," she said. He inclined his head. Outside, New York moved through the October night with its usual indifference. Taxis splashed along 35th Street. A siren passed toward 10th Avenue. Rain touched the windows and turned the street lamps soft around the edges. The next morning, the newspapers would report the arrest of Daniel Harland, known for 19 years as Martin Dale. They would describe the fraud, the poisoning, the stolen company funds, and the false prescriptions. They would probably call Samuel an innocent victim, which was generous, or a criminal imposter, which was incomplete. Newspapers prefer one name for each man and one motive for each crime. The Harland case had offered too many of both. After coffee, Wolfe pushed his chair back. "The anniversary has been restored," Ruth said. Wolfe looked at the empty place. "An anniversary is merely a date. What matters is whether it preserves truth or embalms a lie." He rose and went to the office. At 11 the next morning, he would climb to the plant rooms and spend 2 hours among the orchids, where names were recorded correctly, ancestry was studied rather than concealed, and no blossom was expected to remember what men had ordered it to forget. I remained at the table while Fritz cleared the plates. The empty chair stood beneath the light, no longer waiting for Samuel, Daniel, or any Harland ghost. It had been reserved for the truth, for the first time in 20 years. The truth had arrived for dinner.